hold on to it. Robb Stark, I dare say you're in love, she smiled, it's a really good look on you. Her brow furrowed then and she said, but that's not why you're here. He'd forgotten that. I know, he said, removing his hand from hers and stretching his arm back on the couch behind her. We got an email from SLYNT today. They are proposing we forego the hearing and make a deal instead. A deal, her brow knit. Gardry doesn't make deals. He nodded. Castle and I were wondering if maybe your grandfather. He hasn't said anything, she told him. I spoke to him earlier this week. He's going to be in town on business next month and wants to see us. But we didn't talk about the case. They've all kind of adopted a "you wanted us out of it, we're out of it" mindset. And you don't think he might be pulling strings behind the scenes, he wondered. She shrugged. I mean, I am always half convinced he is partially behind everything, but I don't know. It sort of feels like if he was going to control the outcome of this, he'd want to be seen doing it. Yeah, he nodded, because he hadn't considered that. That makes sense. How do you feel about making a deal? I feel good about it, she asked him, pulling the sleeves of her sweater over her hands. I mean, the idea of being in court and having SLYNT rail at me for being a bad mother wasn't exactly appealing. Right, he agreed. But you disagree, she guessed. No, as your lawyer, I absolutely agree, he told her. It's the right thing without a doubt. It mitigates the liability of them throwing nonsense at you. It gives us more control because nothing is set until we agree. It is the right thing, and I came here to convince you to let us begin the discussion. Okay, she said, now tell me how you feel as Robb Stark, who just tucked in my daughter, and is sitting on my couch with me right now. It's selfish, he warned her. She shrugged. You could do with being that from time to time. You'll tell me I have a problem, he went on. You want to face him in court, she guessed. He shook his head. I want to face him in an alleyway, but I had settled for court. She sighed. Rob. Don't, he warned. Okay, she agreed. But we're going to do the right thing. She smiled. We've got examples to set, right? Yeah, right, he agreed. Do you need to get back to the boys, she wondered. Not right away, he allowed, grinning. Will wants to practice babysitting. She laughed. I know, I'm supposed to convince you of all the reasons he should be allowed to. The whole "but don't you guys like hanging out with me and Joey?" has expired in terms of effectiveness. Last time I got along suffering, I roll along with it. That's not the point, L. He chuckled, because it was an eerily good impression of Will, and said, well, then for his sake, I guess I can stick around for a bit. Then can I ask you a favor, she asked. He nodded, looking around. Is there something that needs fixing? She winced. Yeah, me. His heart ached when he looked back at her, a blush rising on her cheeks. I have had some kind of harmful coping mechanism, so we're working to identify things that are good for me that make me feel better. Oh, he said, because he didn't want to pry, but he was glad that they were delving into that. That's good. I mean that you're finding things. She nodded. Yeah, it's good. Just sort of, would you? She couldn't even look at him. He tucked some of the silky hair that had escaped her ponytail behind her ear. You know the answer is yes, he pointed out gently. She didn't ask a question, she just looked at him for another moment and then slid closer to him. She tucked her legs up, her feet going under his thigh, and then she leaned against his side, tucking her head into his neck. His arms wrapped around her without thought, and she shifted and leaned against him more thoroughly, one of her arms wrapping around his middle. He breathed in her honeysuckle shampoo, resting his cheek on top of her head, rubbing her arm through her soft sweater. Cuddling is a superior coping mechanism, he tried to say lightly, failing to ignore how good she felt in his arms. Yeah, she agreed, it's not just that though. It's you. Oh, he said, hoping she wasn't feeling his erratic pulse. Yeah, I don't know if that's weird to say, she told him, and I know it's sort of lame. But when you hug me, everything feels better for a little while. He closed his eyes and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, rubbing her back. It's not weird. I'm glad that I can help. She snuggled into him more, and he held her tighter, until she was almost in his lap. And she did feel good in his arms. She felt good and she smelled good, and he wanted to pull her into his lap. He wanted that to be normal, something that he could do. He wanted to kiss more than the top of her head. He wanted to feel her in his arms without layers of clothes between them, just her skin on his, the smooth warmth of it. All of that was true and painful. But it paled in comparison to Joey knowing that he'd take care of her, and Myrcella letting him, even in this small way. As though she knew that, she told him, I know you want to be in an alleyway with him, and I won't ask you not to feel that way. But nothing good can from that. And I need you here, with me. Chapter 14. Summary. We Barak. Chapter text. They had needed a victory, apparently. He hadn't realized how much he and his family needed a victory, until they were standing outside in the freezing cold with the snow up to varying places on their legs, more falling all around them, as the clock showed 0.0 and 7 to 3. It was only the loyalist of fans for both teams, and their side had erupted. The kids had been in a painful war of attrition, the best teams of their year, but somehow theirs had prevailed. Thanks in large part to Will, he knew, not as a dad but as someone who had played and watched football for most of his life. It was such a different experience watching him play now, knowing that he loved it. He hadn't realized how much it was affecting him too, feeling like his kid was forcing himself to do something he didn't enjoy, afraid that history was repeating itself. Will loving it had given him permission to do the same. He still had his regrets, his resentments, but there was the joy there too that had long been forced down, released at the sight of his son loving something that he was so good at. Will's cheering section was the only group that was not depleted in spite of the weather. He had told everyone that they didn't need to come, but they'd all acted offended, as though he had suggested that they too weren't playing a crucial role. The Starks and Snows had been varying levels of bundled, Kitty and JJ resisting hats and mittens, tackling each other into the snow with abandon, but Myrcella and Joey had both worn one-piece ski suits and snow boots, fuzzy cream-colored hats and mittens and matching pink cheeks. The suits were pastels, Myrcella's blue and Joey's purple, and the pair of them had gotten more than a few curious glances, looking like they should be enjoying après-ski at a fancy lodge rather than a middle school football game. John had laughed at the pair of them, his black parka unzipped, but he couldn't quite manage it. They were ridiculous, and it wasn't funny. Or it was funny, but the fact that they were doing it wasn't. He couldn't really get it straight in his head, or his heart, wherever the image of the pair of them showing up for his son resided. All he knew was that they looked silly and adorable, and that he could picture the two of them buying them excitedly, no longer feeling like they had to suppress their girlishness or charm. It was like their bore trunk, something that was rebellious in its playfulness. This was furthered in watching Myrcella working painstakingly on a little snow chair for Joey only for it to immediately be destroyed by Grey Wind trying to climb into it with her. He knew that he was giving it too much thought, but he had grown used to giving them too much thought. Grown used to feeling like that wasn't actually possible, that they deserved every last thought in his head, but that it didn't really matter anyway, because they took them all the same. Joey had spent the last quarter with her back against his legs, her head tilting up towards him and shouting "Rob, look!" during a particularly exciting play. He didn't know if it was football she truly enjoyed, or whether she would have learned to love anything Will was involved in, but she was usually the first shouting out, along with him and John. He would remember the look on her face when they won for the rest of his life. She had needed a victory, and Will had given her one. He knew that it wasn't that deep. That it was a middle school football game. But it mattered. It mattered to Joey, it mattered to Will. It mattered to him and Myrcella, watching when Will had trotted over to them all. They'd gotten their hugs and high-fives in, Joey hanging back as Kitty and JJ jumped all around him. He had been exhausted but lifted Joey into his arms anyway and settled her on his hip. "You won," Joey had told him, her arms wrapping around his neck. "Well, you said we were going to, Joe," Will had reminded her, "I couldn't let you down." Joey was small for her age, Will big for his, but it looked so strange seeing him hold her like that. Unsettling, almost. The ease with which he lifted her, the way the girl who still had so many fears tucked her head underneath his chin like there was no reason to be afraid because he was nearby. Though the team had wanted a big celebration, the snow and the promise of it getting far worse had made them postpone. That hadn't stopped their group, though, which was why everyone had piled into whatever car they wanted and come back to his house. The kids had played in the snow for a bit, while he built a fire. The decision was made around 3 o'clock that John, Sangza and Kitty would be staying over, there being no chance no matter how early it was in the season that the kids would have school tomorrow. This had been met with the anticipated celebration, and suddenly there were discussions of pillow and blanket forts and hot chocolate with lots of marshmallows which none of the adults had signed off on. As the man of the hour, Will had gotten to choose what he wanted for dinner, so they'd all gorged themselves on Marcella's eggplant parmesan, and not to be outdone Sangza had made a lemon raspberry cake they all loved. Bottles of wine had been opened with no one driving, and bedtimes kept getting negotiated though it wasn't nearly time. The kids had gone off, and he, Sangza, John and Marcella had pulled out a deck of cards to play spades. John and Marcella had a narrow lead as he tried to cover Sangza going nil with what she claimed was not a perfect nil hand. This had led to a discussion of table talk which everyone had strong opinions about except for Marcella, who thought the whole thing was ridiculous. He looked over at her as she led a low heart the one suit where he was woefully under-equipped in. She met his gaze and winked at him, as though she'd noticed the way he'd thrown every other suit except for that one, and he tried not to laugh. She smiled, the inner edges of her lips ever so slightly wine-stained, as she waited for him to make his move. There was no choice, he threw his 6 of hearts with a shake of his head. John glanced between him and Sangza and then tucked his 5 right underneath it. He could feel it, the excitement from Marcella and John, knowing that the 75 points he and Sangza would go down would give them a much healthier margin. All of that was destroyed when his sister, the rascal, placed her ace of clubs neatly underneath her husband's 5 of hearts. "Thank you," she said to Marcella. Marcella's lips popped open and John shook his head and he said to Sangza, "I love you." They kept playing. Sangza narrowly made her nil hand. He respected and resented her for going nil with the king of spades, and the score went up and down along with accusations of sandbagging and signaling and all the rest. As Sangza was shuffling for the next hand, he offered, "I heard something funny the other day." Marcella turned to him gamely, laughter already in her voice. "What did you hear?" "That you had a date," he responded. He had been trying not to bring it up, but it had been eating away at him. On Thursday night, he had come home from work to find Sangza parking in his driveway. He had asked her if she was there for a girls' night and she'd laughed and said yes, but not with Marcella. She had then told him that Marcella had a date, that some guy at the gallery opening the week before had asked her out and she had said yes. She had told him like it was exciting, like it was progress, like he would feel nothing but happiness at the idea of their friend who had been through so much doing something as simple and lovely as going on a date. And it should have been. Just like he should have been able to laugh with John at the sight of Marcella and Joey in their ski suits. Or looked at Marcella's wine-stained lips without wanting to taste them. But it couldn't, he couldn't. He hadn't realized quite how far it had gotten until he had heard that Marcella was going out with another man, some guy. In that moment, suddenly, he had understand why Will had been so angry to find out that he was going on a date. It wasn't okay, he knew that now. If he was going to date anyone, it should be her, it had to be her, and if she was going to date anyone, he wanted it to be him. The timing wasn't right, and he knew that, but he also knew that they were. And up until that moment, he'd sort of felt that she knew it too. They all turned to look at him. He could feel John's eyes glaring at him, but his were on the gorgeous blush on Marcella's cheek. "And you say John has a dry wit," Sangza noted. "No, you say John has a dry wit," he pointed out. "Regardless, there's nothing funny about Marcella going on a date," Sangza noted. She had no idea how right she was. "No, he's right," Marcella sighed, "he's totally right. It was stupid of me to think it would be a good idea." His stomach churned with guilt. The last thing he'd ever want was to make her feel stupid. She'd had more than enough of that. And just like that, he realized what an ass he had been the last few days. Not to her outwardly or anything but in his mind. He had been so busy feeling hurt and betrayed that he hadn't realized that Sangza was right. That it was exciting and it was progress and he had just trampled all over it because he was greedy. "No, that's," he started, but apparently he'd lost speaking privileges. "No, he's not right," Sangza interrupted, "it was not stupid." Then she pointed at him accusingly, "He's stupid." Marcella giggled and shook her head, but rubbed her forehead, still. "I wasn't ready and I should have known that." Then she looked at him, "It was with this guy that you met at the gallery," he supplied. Her eyes widened slightly and he cleared his throat, covering the whimper that escaped when John kicked him in the shin underneath the table. Sangza told me. Right, she nodded, her cheeks now a painful pink. It was such a great night, he nodded, because it had been. Her brow furrowed though, and she said, and I was feeling, I don't know, good I guess, and now it wasn't just his stomach, it was his whole chest, tearing him apart, and this guy had come into the gallery before and been really kind, and I don't know. He asked me out and I think I got swept up a little and just decided to go for it. She was asking him. She was asking him for permission. Not to date someone else, but to date at all. Or even to feel that way, to feel good enough to accept an invitation to dinner. She was asking him to tell her it was okay. It went further than his opinion on it mattering to her. It was like she didn't trust herself as much as she trusted him. So, he really didn't need the second kick to his shins that John delivered. Yeah, no, that's shit, I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have. I was surprised but Sangza's right, it wasn't stupid. It's great. You should tell that to your face, she noted. He sighed, sorry. I'm trying. It's not any of his business, or any of ours, Sangza said, and Myrcella turned to look at her. Sangza then gestured dismissively at him and John, or I should say it's none of theirs. Myrcella smiled and Sangza went on, now you know that having dinner with a handsome man does not have to be a scary thing, but you also know that you're not ready. I think those are two really important things, so I'm calling it a win. Yeah, Myrcella agreed, smiling more for Sangza's benefit than her own, and said, you're right. Then she stood up and stretched, I think I'm going to go check on the kids. Unless anyone else has any questions. That had obviously been the end of the discussion. And yet he asked, was he nice to you? She turned to him and nodded, before offering a sly smile, as nice as he could be while not shutting up about crypto for 2 hours. He chuckled, ouch. She nodded and then went to leave, stopping and waiting for Sangza when his sister rose too, her hand going to her back and the two of them walking off together. As soon as they were out of earshot, John turned to him and said, what the fuck? He smoothed his hand down his face and said, I know. What was that? He asked him. Their eyes fixed on each other and he noted, you know what that was. John knew, he had known for weeks. He knew that he did. He had seen his warning glare more than enough times. Look, John sighed, leaning forward, shut it down. His jaw clenched, great advice. I'm not giving you advice, John told him, I am telling you to shut it down. How exactly would you like me to do that? He wondered, seriously, I'm asking you. How would you like me to spend this much time with her, which isn't going to stop, we both know that, and shut this down? How the fuck do you think that's possible? Because you have to, John told him. He started to protest and John shook his head, and pointed at him, no. Rob, I'm sorry, but you have to. I refuse for anything to come in between her and Sangza again. And for that matter, I refuse to have anything hurt her again. I don't want to hurt her, he offered uselessly. Well, you will, John told him, I think we are all fooling ourselves a bit here. She is nowhere near ready. And for fuck's sake, you know how badly she needs you. Do not do this to her. Okay, he agreed, but it'd be great if you didn't treat me like an asshole for having feelings for her. John's eyes had softened at his agreement and he said, yeah, I'm sorry. And I know that this sucks. It's not lost on me that you haven't felt like this about anyone since. I don't know, Roslyn, I guess. I'm not, it's not that I don't care about that. He nodded, and then his work phone buzzed on the counter where it had been charging. Typically, he'd prefer not to check on a Sunday evening after a couple of glasses of wine, but he needed an excuse to get up from the table. He needed a way not to say to John, I never felt this way about Roslyn. The ability not to sit there and think about all the ways John was right and how he was still pissed at him anyway. This was not a recipe for taking a Sunday evening email from opposing counsel in stride. Certainly not one from Janos fucking Slynt. He read it once and then twice and then a third time, the way that he always had to when reading one of Slynt's emails. His writing was so pompous that he spoke in circles, and you essentially had to piece together a few words from each sentence to actually understand what he was saying. This email required a fourth read, though for once its message was perfectly clear. Rob, A voice cut into his fifth reading and he looked up from his phone at Mercilla, who had just joined him in the kitchen. Do you want to continue playing? He swallowed and closed out of his phone and set it down on the counter. Without saying a word, bile churning in his stomach, he took a seat back at the table. Is everything okay? Mercilla asked him as she took her seat, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. No, he said, actually no it's not. Rob John warned. It's not about that, he snapped at him. Mercilla's hand left his arm as Sangza asked, what's going on between you two? John waved him off as his phone started buzzing on the counter. He got up from the table and saw that it was Castle. I saw it, he answered. Do not respond tonight, do you hear me? Roderick warned him. Yeah, he agreed. Though in truth there were only so many feelings he could rein in at one time. It's, legally, Castle started, we have to bring this to her. As though Mercilla had heard him, her eyes met his. Yep, he agreed. If you want me. No, he interrupted, I'm with her now. At that, Sangza and John turned to him too. Rob, maybe wait until tomorrow, Roderick suggested. Yeah, he agreed, though he knew that there was no chance he'd get out of telling them now. Yeah. Good call. I'll draft a response in the morning and send it to you for your review. Roderick was silent for a moment and then said, okay. Okay. Yeah. He hung up the phone, not bothering to sit back down. He was done playing. Feeling entirely dehydrated, and went and got himself a glass of water, and by the time he turned around, Mercilla, Sangza and John were all standing around the kitchen waiting for him. Rob, Mercilla said. Did something happen? Did the review from Family Services come back? Her line of thinking was so far from what had actually happened because of course, she always thought even now what she might have done wrong, how she could have screwed things up. Somehow, and he was very much purposefully ignorant on the how Jilly Tali had been put on Mercilla and Joey's case. She was a wonderful social worker, and a great friend, and he had made sure to disclose to both Slynt and Lewin that he had a personal relationship with her and her family. As a compromise, her boss had agreed to attend certain sessions with her and sign an affidavit attesting to the report Jilly was going to produce. He'd gotten all parties to agree in a binding contract to accept the findings, because if there was any possibility of it being contested he would have asked for the case to be reassigned. The last thing in all of this that he was worried about was how a third party would view Mercilla as a mother. And the fact that Mercilla was made his heart hurt so badly for her that it took him out of his head for a second, long enough to assure her, or try to anyway. No, no, nothing like that, he promised. That'll come in at the end of the week and I have no concerns about that. 0. Okay. And you shouldn't either. She nodded, but it was something with my case, wasn't it? Yeah, he agreed, maybe we should talk about it in the morning. She shook her head. I won't sleep tonight if we do, and from the looks of it, you won't either. Please? Do you want us to leave the room? Sangza asked her. No, Mercilla took her hand. No, it's okay. You know everything else. He sighed and took a sip of water and then set the glass down on the counter. We received opposing counsel's first offer for a deal, he told her. Her eyes looked over at his face and then she shook her head, and they didn't include sole custody. No, he swallowed, they included sole custody. Her brow furrowed, so he explained, as part of the deal. I am legally obligated to bring this to you. I understand, she told him, Rob, whatever it is, if he will give me sole custody and supervised visitation I don't care. You would be required to lift the restraining order, recant all statements and documentation related to abuse, sign an affidavit that there was no abuse and that any prior discussion of it was related to adverse reactions to prescribed controlled substances, and sign an NDA agreeing to never discuss your husband or your marriage in any way publicly or privately that may negatively impact his reputation and good standing. For fuck's sake, John breathed out. But it's just a first offer, Sangza noted. We knew it would be bullish. Of course he is going to ask for all of that, it doesn't mean that you are going to give it to him, Mercilla said. They all turned to look at her, but he asked, what? Her lips clenched for a moment, her eyes widened, her hand in a fist in a way that made him wonder if her fingernails were digging into her palm the way she'd once told him that Joey's had. She looked like she was bucking up all her courage. And she used it to say, I accept those terms. No, you do not, he responded immediately. Yes, I do, she argued, her voice shaking but her message clear. Sangza started as John went to move towards her. Myrcella held up her hand. Do not, which one of those would you not give to keep your children? She looked around at all of them. Which one of those would you not give to keep Joey away from him? Sangza and John were silent, because there was nothing they could say to that as parents or as an aunt or an uncle. Suddenly and unexpectedly he had all the objectivity he never thought he'd get on this case. Without exception he was able to now speak to her not as a parent, not as someone who loved her and her daughter, but as her lawyer. Listen to me very carefully, Myrcella, he said. This is out of the question. On paper it is bad enough, but in practice you have no idea how far this could be taken. He is asking you to put in writing that your judgment was so distorted by narcotics that you created and purported delusions. That would be in his possession. He could give it to the press, future employers, he could use it to file a countersuit to take Joey from you 3 years from now. He is asking you to sign a gag order in perpetuity. That means if he were to do any of those things, you could never speak out in defense of yourself, because to do so would be to reflect poorly on his character and good standing. You don't care about any of that. Fine, let's discuss the restraining order. Rob, John warned. No, he ignored him. You lift that restraining order, and he comes after you. Let's say he decides to leave you alive. Rob. Sangza now shouted. His eyes were on Myrcella though, because she had to hear this. She had to understand this. Now he's pissed, right? So he comes after you and does God knows what, because we all know he is capable of anything, because he would have to be devoid of all morality or judgment to do what he has already done to you of all people. So now he really hurts you. You want to bring an assault case? You can't. You can't file for anything, and even if you could, you've already discredited your own evidence of prior violence. So now you're really fucked. This is not a deal, Myrcella, this is a license to hurt you with impunity. She shook her head. He won't budge. Then I will drag his ass back into court, he told her. He won't give you your daughter. I will take her from him. Rob, she sighed. What? He asked. Nothing, she turned away, her hand holding her throat. It was with her back turned to him that she said, I can't lose her. And what? He pushed. When she turned back around there were tears in her eyes. These were not little tears. These were big, terrified, angry tears, her face turning pink with the exertion of trying to keep them in. And if I lose her, her voice broke and she pointed at him, I lose you too. Sweetheart, he went to step towards her and she shook her head. No, she sobbed, I will never forgive you. If we decline and I lose her, she forced herself to stop crying, her shoulders setting as though she needed more weight behind it, as though it might have hurt him less, sunk in less if she'd whispered it. If I take your advice on this, and you're wrong, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me? Perfectly, he responded, and we're even, because if you give in to this I'll never forgive you either. Then he held his hands out. What do you think this is, Elle? Do you think I'm posturing here? You think this is my ego? Fuck my ego and fuck you for thinking that. Fuck you, Myrcella cried, wiping her eyes. Yeah, he agreed. You know what's really funny? You tell me to care less and then you threaten me losing you to get your way. You want me objective. Here's objectivity for you, take this deal or anything like it and you can find yourself a new lawyer. John started to say, but someone else shut him more than he ever could. Dad? Will asked as he came into the room, the other kids trailing behind him. I'm going to go to the bathroom, Myrcella all but ran away. What's wrong with Ella? He asked him. He shook his head at him, but John joked, we lost pretty bad at spades. Will knew he was lying, he could see it all over his face, from the way his eyes followed Myrcella to the way he set his jaw as he looked back at him. The other kids didn't seem to think anything of it, in spite of the fact that Sangza had followed Myrcella out of the room and the remnants of their argument hung about like smoke. Rob? Joey asked. Which one of those would you not give to keep Joey away from him? Yeah, honey, he asked as gently as he was able in the moment. I drew you a picture, and I put it on your desk, she told him, her hand patting his arm. On autopilot he picked her up, the way he always did when she did that. It hurt to hold her in his arms, impossible not to wonder if he was making a mistake. You did. Thank you, he said. What's it of? She yawned, you. And a monster. Oh yeah, his heart twisted, trying to joke, are we having a dance party? No, she giggled, her arms wrapping around his neck and her head leaning on his shoulder. She yawned again and told him sleepily. You're fighting. I had a dream about it. Oh, he responded, stroking her hair and breathing in her sweet smell, was it a scary dream? At first she answered into his neck, but then you were there. Chapter 15. Summary. Thank you all so much for your reactions to the last chapter. That was maybe one of my favorite ones for this story, and I was so glad that you all saw both their sides. I wanted to update this sooner, but I moved out of my apartment and then promptly came down with COVID, so it's not been conducive to writing. Chapter text. There were few things that annoyed him in that dull, petty way that only the silliest things did more than someone aimlessly flicking through the channels. His dad had done it a lot, after his mom had died. Apparently she had always decided what they watched on TV. John did it too when Sangza wasn't around. Maybe it was a habit of happily married men, he wasn't sure. When he and Roslyn had been married they had watched TV in separate rooms. It didn't really matter, but Sangza was over at Merciless and John just kept flicking. Neither of them were working, not really, only taking calls occasionally. The whole city was shut down, and much of the north. Tomorrow everyone would be playing catch-up, but today the whole region had given themselves the day off. John didn't have his laptop, and while he did, he had written the only email he really cared about late into last night, working it over and over again, draft after draft, and now all he had to do was send it. Nothing on John determined, though he kept changing the channel. Yeah, he rubbed his hand down his face before taking another sip of water. His annoyance wasn't aided by the headache he'd had ever since he woke up. He hadn't been hungover since John's bachelor party, but this was the closest he'd come. He could have taken pain reliever, but he didn't. It wasn't so much that he was in denial, just that he didn't think he deserved it. He should have a headache, and that rut in his gut he got when he was truly angry, and that twinge in his heart that he felt when he was guilty. John glanced over at him and then shut off the TV, dropping the remote on the couch. They had hardly spoken all morning. He wished he had gone over to Merciless with Sangza, Kitty and JJ, but he'd stayed behind with him and Will, who had been taking advantage of the snow day and sleeping in, exhausted from his game yesterday and settling into preteen hormones without pause. So John said. There's nothing to say, he told him. There's plenty to say, John argued. I don't want to hear it, he told him, standing up and heading for the kitchen, not from you. John followed him in. He went to get more coffee, but the pot was empty, so he started dismantling the machine to clean the parts, more of them than he might have cleaned on a regular day. He just wanted something to do. John watched him clean it, taking a seat at his kitchen island and rolling a lemon back and forth in a way that made him miss the channel surfing. I was wrong, John said finally. He paused for a moment as he started putting the coffee machine back together, his back to John. About what? He questioned. What I said, how I said it, John quickly corrected himself, which felt a little bit like a cop-out. You were right, I was treating you like an asshole. Well, I sure proved you wrong, didn't I? He turned around and caught the edges of John's smile. They looked at each other, the pair of them sorry and angry. Everything I said standing right here was right. John nodded, and gestured behind him to where they'd been playing cards. Everything I said sitting right there was right too. Doesn't mean I should have said it. He shook his head. She had to know. She isn't thinking straight. And you are. John smirked. Castle felt the same way about the offer, he argued. No, he didn't. He knew it was a bad deal, a ridiculous deal. As her lawyer he would have told her not to take it. But I'll bet Castle slept last night, and looking at you I don't have to guess, John noted. He does not feel about that offer the way that you feel. No one felt about that offer the way that he felt about it. He knew that. Over these past months, he had spent a fair bit of time imagining Gardry's death. It had become a bit of a tick, a place his mind wandered when it had no other one that it needed to be. He knew it was unhealthy, and he didn't care. What I don't understand, John went on, is why you care. His eyes snapped to him and he was about to breathe fire when John shook his head. No, I mean, what exactly is the merit of objectivity? Clarity, he suggested, and then pointed out, and weren't you the one telling me to shut my feelings down last night? I want you to stop flirting with her. I don't want you to stop caring about her. John stood up. For fuck's sake, Rob, you don't get it. He folded his arms and waited because John clearly wasn't finished. His lectures were pretty legendary among him and his siblings. They'd all gotten a talking to at one time or another. The more you fought them, the longer they got, as though he'd spent every moment of his life not speaking just to store up the right words to appropriately destroy you. John turned to him, his voice measured and angry. She did not come to you because she wanted you to be objective. She can say whatever she wants about you not needing to be her white knight and all that. It's bullshit. It's just bullshit. She wants you to save them both so fucking badly and she feels guilty for wanting it, yeah. But rest assured she used to lie in bed next to that fuckhead and pray for this, that she'd be under your projection, that her daughter would be under your protection. And I don't blame her. There is no amount of inner strength that can save her from him. But you can, in so many ways. You can save her, you can save them both, and it is okay to want that. I want you to want that. We are all sitting here relying on you wanting that. But... He let out a harsh chuckle and John nodded in acknowledgement. But part of saving her has to be giving her time to heal, John told him. He looked him in the eye, and said, and I know it's the hardest part. It's the shittiest, most thankless part. But I promise you will be glad you did. He held John's gaze for a moment and then walked over to another cupboard and grabbed out a bottle of ibuprofen. He shook a couple into his hand and offered the bottle to John, who shook his head but gestured to the next bottle. He smirked and handed him the antacid instead. Can I ask you something without you biting my head off? He asked John. John nodded, and then popped another antacid in preparation. With Sansa, did you feel differently right away, because you'd known her forever? John seemed to think about it for a moment and then said, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was because I'd known her forever or what. I just knew I'd never felt anything like it. Yeah, he agreed. John waited and so he told him what he hadn't the night before. I never felt it for Roslyn. I loved her but I've never felt this, and I guess I'm not handling it very well. John nodded. Joey doesn't help either. He chuckled. No, she doesn't. She had me in one and somehow I'm just meant to go on living my life being what? Being the man she trusts most in this world, John told him without hesitation. Don't fucking belittle that. Not to me. The runner-up. I think you're forgetting Will, he teased, because he didn't know what else to say. What about me? Will asked as he came into the kitchen, his hair going in a million directions. Just wondering when the NFL is gonna start scouting you, John told him, clapping on the shoulder. Will winced. You've got to stretch after a game too. Auntie Sansa would love to do yoga with you. Will glanced around. Is she here? She's at Merciless, he assured him. Thank God. Will sat down at the island. He and John chuckled and John sat down beside him. A little bit of the anger was gone, but not as much of it as he would have hoped. He hadn't realized how much of it wasn't actually at John, or Gaudry for that matter. Rob went to the fridge and pulled out some eggs and grabbed a frying pan, while John and Will started rehashing the game, plays that had been particularly spectacular and areas where the other team might have had them. He remembered these post-game debriefs from when he was Will's age, and younger. It wasn't enough to be a good player, to be fast and strong, agile. He had to understand the game, otherwise it was all just a bit of luck. John had loved sleeping over after games to get that part with his dad. He was letting the eggs cook and the bread toast when Grey Wind got off the floor and hurried out of the room. Hey, he heard behind him. He had thought it would be Sansa, or the kids, even though he'd texted Mercilla that morning, asking her to come over when she had a chance. Grabbing a plate, he took the toast out of the toaster and turned around. She was wearing her parka, still zipped, as though to show that she wasn't staying. That wasn't necessarily fair, it was freezing out, and her cheeks showed it as she took off her hat. Morning all, she greeted them with a scrunchy-eyed smile. His stomach twisted at the sight. Hyla, Will said and then looked between him and John and asked her, were you okay last night? Rob and John's eyes met briefly before they both pretended not to be looking at Mercilla. He was though, and he watched her prepare to lie and then decide not to. No, she shook her head. I wasn't. I was very upset. Was it Joey's father? Will asked. Merciless eyes flicked to him briefly, but Will said, I know. I know that he's a bad person. I know that he hurt you. Will, John offered half-heartedly. Mercila waved him off though. It's okay. And I know you knew it right away, didn't you? You called me a liar. She smiled at Will, who nodded sheepishly. Yes. I was upset because of him. But it's all going to be okay and you don't need to worry about me, all right? She ended the last, standing in between John and Will's seats, smoothing Will's hair. He turned away, adding the scrambled eggs to Will's plate, busying himself grabbing him a fork and a knife and the raspberry jam he liked on his toast. He felt John's eyes on him the whole time, like he knew what it did to him to see Mercila and Will together like that. She was hugging Will when he turned back around, his son not quite turning into her embrace but holding on to one of her arms, so that she wouldn't let him go just yet. After a moment that wasn't enough apparently, because his chin went to it too, his cheek resting against Mercila's upper arm. She looked down at him in concern, smoothing his hair and then saying something softly in his ear that had him nodding but not letting go. There was little that made Mercila seem more diminutive than when she was beside Will. It was like how it used to be with Rukun, the two of them standing in the cemetery after his mom's funeral, Rukun an oversized puppy in her arms. Somehow though it made her seem sturdier too. She would have stood there all day, taking more and more of his son's weight. She could do that. He set the plate and jam down in front of Will, before going to get him some orange juice. When there was little else left that he could do apart from washing the pan, which would be a bit too obvious to everyone, he turned and looked at Mercila. Want to go to my office for a minute? He asked. She didn't quite meet his eye but said, yeah, sure. John picked up the conversation with Will then, his son nodding along as he drank his juice, and he led Mercila through the downstairs into his home office. He waited for her to follow him inside and then he closed the door, walking around to sit at his desk. She took one of the seats in front of it, that almost no one had ever sat in. Something he had told Roslyn and the decorator would be the case and been overruled, her eyes resting on the desk, where Joey's latest creation rested. She drew it for me yesterday, he said, pushing it towards her. Mercila turned it around with one slender finger, not picking it up. She looked at it for a moment before retracting her hand, pulling her sweater down over it. Apparently she had a dream, she interrupted, and their eyes met. I know. If I lose her, I lose you too. He had no idea why something so obvious could be so offensive. In his heart of hearts he knew that he couldn't blame her for saying it, for feeling it. He couldn't imagine what would happen to his relationship with Sansa or John if something happened to one of his kids on their watch, no matter how out of their control it might be. The grief would pull at them, fraying until they finally tore. There was no way to forgive the person who took your child from you, and he knew that. Even still he could not help but resent her for it. When she had come to him with the request, she had not shared the ultimatum. That was his fault too, though, he supposed. He was a lawyer. It was his job to read the fine print. If he had, he would not have acted differently, but there was a difference between knowing something in your heart and having it be said to your face. He placed a piece of paper down over top the drawing, and then a pen down on top of that. Please read that and sign if you consent, he said. I think it's unlikely that they'll accept, but if they do, this will be binding. Her brow furrowed for a moment, looking between him and the sheet. Oh. What? He asked. I thought never mind. She shook her head, and pulled the paper towards her. There was that twinge of guilt again, because he knew exactly what she thought. She thought he asked her to come over here so that he could apologize to her. As though if he were going to apologize to her, he would make her come to him. He wasn't sure why it annoyed him that she didn't realize that he would never do that, but it was possible that everything about her would annoy him right now. Because he was also annoyed that she thought he should apologize first, without offering one of her own. He had considered walking this over to her, the night before, having erased any attempt on either of their parts to keep the custody battle separate from their relationship. But in a moment of maturity, or maybe just self-preservation, he had thought to ask her to come to him, so that they could do it in here, a room he rarely spent any time in, a room where she hadn't tucked her feet underneath her legs as she pet his dog, where JJ Haddon made her let out a giggling OOF as he plopped himself into her lap, and not at her house with the kitchen table from Winterfell, and the walls decorated with Joey's art. She seemed to read it twice, and then signed her name as she shook her head. They won't go for this. He took the page from and nodded. I know. She nodded. Are you just scanning that to them or? No, he tucked the page into a folder. I have an email drafted if you'd like to look it over. She nodded, so he signed into his computer and opened up the draft he'd reworked again and again. He read it once more before turning his laptop towards her. Myrcella leaned forward and took hold of his mouse, her elbow leaning on the desk as she read. She read a few sentences and then her eyes met his. He was reminded of that snowy afternoon at Jon and Sansa's, Joey's eyes reflecting the world outside. Myrcella's looked much the same now, with the glare from the freshly fallen snow coming in through the window. Except that the purple circles had returned in full force under her eyes, and he knew that she had as little sleep as he did. She turned back to the computer screen and finished reading before turning the laptop back to him. I thought you didn't want him angry, she noted. He took the laptop back and clarified, with you. Her brow furrowed. I'm signing it. The offer, not my email, he pointed out. Her jaw set. Okay. Though I think you're giving Gendry credit for more nuance than he's capable of. What would you like me to say then? He asked. You know what I'd like you to say, she told him. Still, he asked. Let's not do this again, she sighed. I should get back. Sansa's outnumbered. Sansa's fine, he argued. Yeah, Myrcella agreed. Well, I don't want to sit here with you being angry at me and me being angry at you. Is that enjoyable for you? Not particularly, no, he said, adding formally, nastily, thank you for coming in. Oh fuck off, Rob, she sighed. I'm doing what you want me to do, you don't get to decide how I feel about it. He watched her eyes widen, a small smile coming to her face. What? He couldn't help but ask. She pointed at him and shook her head. You don't get to decide how I feel about this. You've made that clear, he said. She shook her head, her fingers going to her lips, her eyes wandering over his face. I'm so mad at you. Okay, he said, because he was pretty mad at her too, but that didn't seem like the right thing to say. She smiled to herself, her cheeks flushed. She laughed. I love you. What? He asked. I'm so furious with you I can't even bear to sit here, she told him with a bit more glee in her voice than the words should have allowed. But I get to be. She looked at him. You're angry with me? Yeah. And last night, have you ever been angrier with me than you were then? She asked. He shook his head and she laughed, tears flooding her eyes. That's what it looks like when you're angry with me. All at once he understood, the strangeness of her reaction making an overwhelming amount of sense. Yeah, sweetheart, he offered in a softer voice, promising, this is what it looks like when I'm angry with you. It hit him then, just how not objective he really was. All he had thought about since last night were what her words meant for him. He hadn't once thought of what those words meant for her, the fact that she had yelled at him, swore at him. The fact that she had argued with him at all. She had been scared, terrified, but not for one moment had she been afraid of him, of bringing that to him. That, maybe, of all the things she had done, showed him the full weight of her trust. I'm mad at you, she repeated. I'm mad at you, he returned. She nodded. Yeah. I need a little space, I think. He nodded. I think that's a good idea. Let me know when you want me to tell you to go fuck yourself. She smiled. I will. He couldn't help but smile then too. As angry and hurt as he was, there was something else there too. A safety net, maybe. And it proved that he had told it to Jon true, because he had never felt this when he argued with Roslyn. He had felt disdainful, misled, betrayed, disgusted, and it had always felt like the fight might be their last. She had given him the impression that she could walk out the door and never look back. There was an odd sort of symbiosis at play. The very fact of Myrcella telling him she needed space, serving as a promise that she'd return. In taking what she needed, she gave him something he didn't know he was allowed to ask for. He reminded himself of that over the next few days. Around him, in line waiting for his lunch and on conference calls, everyone was complaining about the days growing shorter. He envied them that, the quick passing of time. The hours ticked by for him, waiting until he would see her every morning for a few moments, a brief wave to him and laughter with his boys, Joey running over to give him a hug on Wednesday morning. On Thursday, he received a rejection from SLYNT. Pompously worded and dripping with bullshit, Lewin CC'd in a way that he hadn't been when he'd sent their original offer, as though to make him seem unreasonable, as though Castle hadn't forwarded it to Lewin directly. That afternoon came with good news, though. The report from Family Services, overwhelmingly supportive of Mercila. He had read his fair share of these reports, none had looked like this. He double-checked it twice to make sure that Jilly's superior had signed off on it, stood by all her findings. The report was difficult to read too though, outlining all the ways that Gadri had harmed Joey's psyche and development. It was a subdued victory, Mercila so clearly being her safe place to land, when it was clear she had learned far too young how important it was to have one. Even still, he had forwarded it to Mercila, writing a short message with it. In case Joey forgets to give you a Mother's Day card, at least you'll know that your government thinks you're the world's greatest mom. Rob. P.S. Take all the time you need, I'll be here. She'd texted him back later that night somewhat cryptically, there are a few things I'm still sorting out, but thank you. On Friday morning, in spite of what he'd said, he had to speak to her. It wasn't just because he felt himself going slightly crazy, a part of him getting annoyed because the longer he spent away from her the more his anger evaporated, even though he knew he was entitled to it. But he had done it for Will, not himself. His oldest son had been on his case for months now about babysitting. It was a little difficult to tell him that he wasn't old enough when he so clearly showed every day that he was mature enough. He still didn't feel comfortable with it at night, some arbitrary delineation within the forces of good and evil, but with an overwhelming amount of errands backlogged, he thought a Saturday morning when neither of them had any activities to rush off to or plans, when he would be at most 15 minutes away seemed like an okay place to start. It had hurt him a little, the wariness Mercila's eyes had shown when he'd asked her if she had plans for Saturday morning, as they stood out in his driveway, their kids waiting in their cars to be taken to school. She hadn't quite been able to look at him, her cheeks pink with cold, but he had seen it pass through her anyway. When he had explained it was for Will, that she didn't have to do anything, that he just wanted to know whether she'd be nearby, she promised immediately, adding as she walked to her car that she was glad he had finally given in. He couldn't help but worry as he said goodbye to them both that morning, the pair of them barefoot in their flannel pajama pants, working on a Lego set that Will had long been telling JJ he would help him with. He had looked at Grey Wind, who was laying on the couch, half his body covered by a throw blanket, and been entirely unconvinced that he would be any help but comforted he was there all the same. He'd put his phone on high volume and vibrate and set about his errands. Somewhere between the dry cleaners and his oil change, he started to feel a little better. And just as he was restarting his car, his phone flashed with Mercila's name, a picture of her and Joey that Kitty had picked showing up along with it. Mercila, hey, is everything alright? He asked. She was silent for a moment, long enough for his body to fill with fear, before she said, the boys are okay, but I think you need to come home. Rob. It was pulsing now, and he wondered if she had been right, if he had provoked Gadri too much and he'd come after her instead. But then she explained, Rosalind's here. Chapter 16. Summary. This chapter was a struggle. I've written it the way I originally wanted to, after trying to do it the way I thought I was supposed to and hating it. Not all questions are going to be answered all at once, etc. Because I wanted it to feel natural. Also, just a note, in the last chapter, when Mercila said I love you she didn't mean it as being *in love. She's asked Rob before if he loved her and this was more of that, an acknowledgement of how much they care for each other. We're not at the confessions of love stage, yet. Chapter text. He couldn't remember the last time he was this tired before 9 o'clock. Probably the last time that Kitty had slept over. She had a way of filling every moment, and she was so fun and silly that he often didn't notice he hadn't sat down or stopped playing or talking in hours until it caught up with him all at once as he closed the door after tucking her and JJ in, and then he'd just collapse. Often by then Will would already be in his room, having taken refuge from Kitty and JJ's non-stop Kitty and JJ-ness. He'd poke his head in and the two of them would nod at each other, without saying much of anything, their eyes wide and tired, and then he'd say well I'll leave you to it, and be in his bed 90 seconds later. He wished for that kind of tiredness now. The kind that came from a day well spent with his sons and his niece, a revolving door of activities and little negotiations. No, you can't have ice cream for lunch. Yes, we can get ice cream after lunch if everyone eats a good one. No, I don't think that movie is appropriate for you guys. Yes, I have watched the preview and it does look funny. He had faced off against attorneys with far less talent than two 8-year-olds deeply in want of marshmallows. On days like that, he fell into bed, yes, but he did so with a smile on his face, often laughing at something one of the kids had said or done in the quiet darkness of his room before sleep actually took hold. But he was not laughing now. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard. 8:35 p.m. and a lot of red brake lights ahead. A part of him wanted to call Marcella again, to let her know that he would likely be another hour, but she already knew that. Really, he just wanted to hear her gentle voice saying, "Don't worry, I've got them for as long as you need, just please drive safely," as she had when he'd called 2 hours earlier. She was worried about him, he knew that she was. He wondered if it felt this way when he worried about her. Her worry was a warm blanket his body was wrapped in just a bit too snugly, only feeling the constraints when he tried to kick out a leg or release an arm, though it was so comforting he had no real desire to be freed. It had been etched on her face, certainly, but mostly it had been in her eyes. Those beautiful green eyes that he had watched fill with tears, scrunch in a fake smile, alight with surprise. He hadn't realized that a person's eyes could show different kinds of worry, but hers could. It was different, to when she worried about Joey or the custody battle or whether she had said or done the wrong thing. She looked like he had when his boys had started to eat solid food, his mouth opening and closing in sympathy with theirs, as though he could chew and swallow it for them. She had offered to do just that. Not chew and swallow his food, but to drive Roslyn back. For a brief moment he had felt a twinge in his stomach, thinking that maybe she thought he was so angry he might hurt Roslyn, thinking that she was trying to spare her, another woman with a too strong ex. She wasn't though, and it had all at once became so obvious that he'd felt ashamed for suspecting her of suspecting him. It was him she was trying to protect. A part of him wondered now if she would let him off the hook for wanting to save her, whether she saw as clearly as he did that she wanted to save him too. He doubted it. He hadn't considered letting her drive Roslyn, and wordlessly it had been agreed that the boys would stay with her until he returned. Thank God. The idea of Marcella with that scumbag, it was too much. All the progress she had made could have been wiped out. He had seen a loser, but to Marcella he would have been a threat. His mind was so muddled with all of it. But he knew that he had to make sense of it, less for himself, but for the boys so that he could explain it to them if they asked, which he knew that Will would. It had been just before noon when Marcella had called him, telling him to come home. When he had arrived, he had expected some manner of chaos, but there wasn't any. They were all at his house, around the kitchen table. Marcella and Roslyn both had steaming cups of tea in front of them. It had been so jarring to see them beside one another. Roslyn had never liked Marcella, the few times that they had met, and he knew how Marcella felt about her, so it was strange the way Roslyn directed so much of what she said towards her, as though they had a camaraderie, as though Marcella might take her side. Roslyn had never quite learned how to read a room, nor had she ever managed to understand the idea of holding it together for someone else's sake. So she and Marcella couldn't possibly have been less alike, and Roslyn couldn't even see the differences, and of course had no idea what it meant when Marcella scrunched her eyes as she smiled at her. It was easier to think about Marcella, rather than the boys. His stomach knotted every time he thought of them, his foot pushing on the gas in futility with so many cars ahead. He shook his head and banged his hand on the steering wheel, tears filling his eyes. "Fuck you, Roslyn," he shouted into the emptiness of his car. "Fuck you." He wasn't sure who broke his heart more, which was a terrible game to play with one's children. They were just so themselves, so beautifully themselves, that it was impossible to measure. Maybe it was JJ, who had been on the floor in front of the kitchen table, playing with a toy train, a character he'd never liked, from a show he hadn't watched since he was 3. "Dad. Look what Mom brought me." He'd looked up, a broad smile on his face when he had walked in. The simplicity of his love, so freely given at even the most paltry signs of affection from her, tore at him. Or it could have been Will. Will, who had been begging him for weeks to let him babysit, telling him that he knew how to take care of JJ. Proving it, too, by sending his little brother to go get Myrcella at the first sign of trouble. There was no easy smile from him, no happy greeting. He sat at the kitchen table with his mother and Myrcella and Joey. Roslyn had brought something for him, too, JJ had declared. A t-shirt, that Will promptly clarified was too small. It was then that he had seen what Roslyn was trying to do with Myrcella, turning to her conspiratorially, a light laugh. "He's growing so fast," words said by so many mothers through the ages. He had no idea where she thought she got the right. Myrcella had stood up, and both his boys' heads had snapped looking at her, even JJ, who thought he was happy that his mother had come to visit. He wasn't sure if Myrcella had been planning to give them space, or if it had been her intention all along to offer to make some lunch for everyone, but that was what she did after looking from JJ to Will, the latter holding her gaze before sliding Joey's chair closer to him, ostensibly to look at what she was drawing, but very much looking like a little boy reaching for his favorite stuffed animal. It was only then that Joey had looked up, looked at him, blinking out of whatever trance she'd learned to put herself in when adults were doing things she didn't want to know about. For a moment, it was easy to fall into a rhythm with her, comforting too, even as it was spiteful. It was wasted energy, that, though, because there was no reason that Roslyn would care about his obvious connection with another woman's child when she didn't even know the proper shirt size or favorite train of her own. Roslyn didn't get up to help, so it was only when she excused herself to go to the bathroom that he saw it. Myrcella's eyes had been on him, but his had been on Will, who had in turn been watching Myrcella. She would have taken her anyway, "She's that kind of mom," Will had once said of her, directly contrasting her to his own. Roslyn, who had left him and JJ behind, and was now pregnant once again. She had always carried her babies lightly, he remembered her taking pride in it. "I never even had to wear maternity clothes." She would laugh when people told her how great she looked postpartum. That was still the same. Until you saw her from the side, it was impossible to tell. He tried not to read anything into that, knowing that women's bodies were all different, but even still, no matter how they carried, so often there was something in their face, or the placement of their hand on their belly, that showed they had been transformed even if their body showed little signs of it. Roslyn was intransigent though. That had been the end of that. He hadn't been inclined to play nice in the first place. She had no right to just show up on his doorstep without notice. To put his kids through that without any discussion. But the idea of her bringing another child into the world, bringing the proof of that into his house, in front of the children she'd abandoned, was too much for him to take. Waiting for her outside the bathroom, he had simply said, "You need to leave." "Or what?" she'd asked smugly. That was too much for him to take too, down the hall from a woman who had been punished for spending time with his family, or looking too beautiful, or being asked too many questions at an event she had been forced to attend. Everything about her was an assault against the people he loved. She thought that she lived without consequences, but really she just let them behind along with everything else. He had kept his voice down, he had kept his temper, ushering her into his office while they spoke. When they'd come out, Grey Wind and all the kids were gone, and Myrcella was there, cleaning up lunch. Roslyn was in the bathroom and he told Myrcella what he could. That he had to drive her, that she was living somewhere a few hours away. That there was some problem with the place she was staying. That he didn't know how long it would take. She had asked him if he wanted her to drive Roslyn, not bothering to ask how she had gotten there in the first place. When he told her no, he had been about to ask her if she minded watching the boys, or if he should call Sangza, when she'd told him she was going to grab some of Grey Wind's kibble to feed him later on. "You guys need to come over with me for a minute," she had determined though. He had thought she meant so that he could explain, even though she would have done a better job of it. It was then though that he saw the full extent of her hatred for Roslyn when she seethed, "She doesn't get to leave without saying goodbye." He should have put her on a bus. On a train, or something. But he couldn't. A part of him still felt responsible for her, and knew that he always would no matter what. He wished he could have pulled Myrcella inside his brain, inside his heart, and said, "See how it's different." Because while he felt responsible for Roslyn, he resented her for it, and hated her all the while. It was Roslyn, not Myrcella, that triggered his sense of responsibility. This is what it looked like when all affection and desire was gone and only duty remained. Too much of his time on this drive had been thinking about Ursula. Like chatting easily with Joey in the uneasiness of the kitchen earlier, it was a balm for his mind. It was easier than thinking about Roslyn and the child she was expecting. This time there would be no safety net for the baby. The father was not him. He had bolted the second she had told him. Even if she sued him for child support, it likely would yield little. That was why she had shown up. Not to see her two children. Not to tell them that they were going to have a half-sibling. Not to bring those stupid little presents. She hadn't been there for them at all. She had been there for him. She wanted more money. She always had. That had been the start of their problems, even though they owned a 6-bedroom house before either of them had turned 30. When they had first started hooking up, she had told him she thought it was cool that he hadn't tried to go pro, but that changed over time as she swiped through Instagrams of wags. He wanted to be one of those husbands that said it's our money, but the trouble was he didn't trust her with it. He had deposited money into an account for her every month, directly from his paycheck, keeping the accounts with the kids' trusts and his own entirely separate. When they had separated and eventually divorced, he agreed to pay her alimony, even though as the sole guardian of their children she should have been paying him child support. The amount he gave her had made his own lawyer cringe, telling him that they could get away with far less, but he hadn't cared. She was welcome to it, as long as she left him and his boys alone. She had the audacity to ask for more, now that she was expecting another child. The fact that it was not his did not seem like reason enough to her that he shouldn't be paying for it. A part of him felt it was entirely possible that a year from now there'd be a little bassinet on his front steps waiting for him, Roslyn nowhere in sight. A part of him would almost prefer that than letting any child be raised in the place where Roslyn had been living. The guy she was living with wasn't the father. It was a friend of his. Apparently they'd been sleeping together on the side. He was beyond a deadbeat, and he had no idea how they had even found themselves in the same circles. Roslyn had always been too aspirational. He wondered if it was even true. Clearly she had wanted him to see the house, the block. It wasn't unlike her to try to manipulate him, and she had the fortitude to sleep with a loser for a few weeks to achieve it. The guy had tried to stop her from leaving, but half-heartedly, like he was helping someone else memorize their lines for a play. He had checked her into one of those hotels meant for longer stays, with little kitchenettes, where she could stay until the first of the month. He had told her that he wouldn't give her any more money, even though he had been working out terms to do so since she first asked. A signed agreement by her, that she wouldn't show up unannounced or without his approval. It wouldn't be a restraining order, she would be in no real trouble if she violated, but he would withhold payments, which would matter more to her anyway. He wasn't sure how much he could control, he would have to speak to his lawyer, but it couldn't just be a blank check, not if he was going to increase the amounts. It would have to go to specific things. Rent. Care for the child. He knew that in the eyes of the world, men who tried to control women's finances were not often seen in a good light, but he didn't care. She could agree or not. If she didn't want to have the stipulations, then she could accept the already generous amount he gave her each month. Besides, no one was stopping her from getting a job and her own source of income if she wanted to. His phone buzzed and he saw that it was Sangza. She'd been out earlier when he'd called, but John must have filled her in. Hey, he answered. Where are you? She asked. I've got about another 20 minutes, he realized, glancing at the exit he was passing. How are you? She asked. I'm fine, just want to get back to the boys, he told her, stomach churning. She was silent for a moment and then breathed, she's pregnant. Yup, he agreed. That should be illegal, Sangza said. I mean obviously it shouldn't be, but what the fuck? He sighed. Yeah, I can't really think about it. Okay, Sangza agreed. Yeah, okay. What is it? He asked. She was silent for a moment and then said, you know when Elle first got back and I was afraid of asking her the wrong questions. Well, then with everything with Joey I just realized how more important than that was asking the right ones. And how? I really failed at that with Ella, but with you too. You didn't fail at anything, Sangza, he told her. I always knew how you felt about her. But I didn't know how you felt about yourself, she argued. Or her for that matter. He swallowed. Can we not do this now? It's not that It's just been a long day. Yeah, okay, she agreed. Let me know if you need anything tomorrow. John can take the boys. I think they need to be with me tomorrow, but thanks. We'll see you guys for dinner, he said. At my house, Sangza noted. He cracked a smile for the first time in hours. That's between you and Elle. I'll show up wherever you guys tell me. She's encroaching, Sangza noted, horning in. Stripping away my allies one barefoot Contessa recipe at a time. He chuckled. She knows you have a busy day. She was being thoughtful. See. Another one bites the dust. Fly away, little birdie, Sangza sighed dramatically. She talked to him the rest of the way home. They didn't talk more about Roslyn or the boys or much of anything of any importance. Mostly they talked about nonsense, which is what he needed, and she knew it. They hung up as he pulled into his driveway. He sat there for a moment. All day, this is what he had wanted. To get back to his kids. To be able to tell them that it was okay and make them feel better if they weren't. Now though, he sat there for a moment, realizing that he had wasted too many hours not figuring out what he was going to say. There were 100 conversations he'd had in his head, but his mind had refused to articulate these ones. He got out of his car and walked over to the guest house. He'd have to put more salt down in the morning. It had been wet earlier and now it was cold and a new sheen of ice rested over everything. The front porch light was on and he walked up the steps, knocking lightly, not sure who would be asleep. A moment later he saw Ursula walking towards him through the window and he heard her unlocking the door. Hey, he greeted her as she let him inside. Hi, she said. Her hand reached up and he was startled by its warmth as her fingertips touched his cheek, before her palm cupped it. Without his consent his head bowed, his cheek leaned against her. Her other hand was in his hair then, drawing him closer. His eyes closed when he felt her lips at his temple, his breath releasing in a sigh when she kissed to his cheekbone. I'm so sorry, she told him in that gentle voice. I'm so sorry about today. I'm so sorry about before. He shook his head. I'm sorry. I was terrible, she lamented. His eyes opened and he moved so his forehead was resting against her warm one, his hands wrapping around her wrists. You were terrified because of how much you love your child. Their eyes locked and he asked, can you imagine that in this moment there is anything you need to apologize for less? I don't want to shine in comparison, she told him. You shine all on your own, he might have said at a different time, but it caught in his throat. It was strange, how much their roles had reversed in a single day. There had been so many times that he had wanted to say that to her. Even when they had been fighting the other day and she had been celebrating the fact that she could yell at him, be angry at him. It had been an important revelation for her, but at the same time he had wanted to say he shouldn't be your rubric. He hadn't though, because there was little good in saying something both so obvious and so inconsequential. Of course Gadri shouldn't be her rubric, and Roslyn shouldn't be his, but it did little good for either of them to hear it when that was all they knew. So he knew she meant it when she said it. She didn't want to be let off the hook. That was fine, neither did he. But it would keep. He kissed the heel of her palm so that he didn't kiss her lips. She was so close, he could have done it. Everything else would have been drowned out for a moment or two. How are they? He asked instead, forcing it all to rush in. They're upset, she told him. JJ that she left, Will that she came. He wondered if anyone else had ever so perfectly understood the differences between his children. Come on, she lowered her hands, his still holding her wrists. She pulled one and he went to release her but she took his hand. I put JJ and Joey down a while ago, but Will is back here. They went back into the living room, where Will was sitting on the couch. The TV wasn't on, and he wasn't sure if they had been talking or just sitting. Grey Wind was nowhere to be found, probably upstairs with Joey and JJ. He went over and sat down beside him, stroking his hair before he pressed a kiss to it. Hi baby. I'm not a baby, he told him. You're my baby, he wanted to say. I know, he said instead. She's having one, Will said. She's having a baby. Yeah, he agreed. Why? Will asked. He swallowed. Sometimes these things aren't planned. Sometimes they just happen. They'd had the sex talk, so Will knew that intellectually at least. Even still, that hardly mattered when you were faced with it when it came to your own mother. Is the baby going to live with us? Will asked. He thought about imagining walking up his front steps and seeing a bassinet. No, he said. It's going to live with her, Will reasoned. I would think so, he nodded. Does she know how to take care of it? Will asked. Memories flashed before him. Coming home and finding JJ with a dirty diaper because the nanny had left an hour or two before he got home. Hastily bought formula when he found out she'd been drinking wine when she was meant to be nursing. Will sleeping on the floor in JJ's nursery when he had to work late. She had kept it together when Will was a baby. He never would have had JJ with her if she hadn't, though he later realized it had been the novelty of her first rather than any overwhelming maternal love. With JJ though, and Will as a toddler, it had all fallen off the rails. He had tried to get her looked at for postpartum depression, but she wasn't depressed. She just wasn't meant to be a mother, and apparently no one had ever told her that she didn't have to be one. He swallowed. I guess she'll have to learn. Will nodded. Ella has dinner for you. He looked up at her, where she stood behind the couch and said, thank you. I think we should go home, though. She nodded. It's all wrapped up. I'll go get it. Thanks. I'm going to go get JJ and Grey Wind, all right? He asked Will. Will nodded and he pressed another kiss to his hair, squeezing his shoulder as he stood up. He went upstairs and found Grey Wind on the landing, parking himself right in between the boys, and Joey and Marcella for that matter. Stroking his ears briefly, he walked by and went into Joey's bedroom quietly. His eyes went to her bed first by rote, but it was empty. His brow knit until he looked at the other twin bed, that was usually empty. It wasn't now, though. He felt tears fill his eyes as he looked at the two of them. Joey must have climbed in with JJ, their perfect little heads rested on the same pillow. JJ was holding Joey's arm against his chest with both arms. They had grown close, ever since the fight, but he had never seen them like this. Everyone was so intent on protecting Joey, that they forgot about when she looked Ghost in the eye and told him she'd never hurt him. Chatty was resting on the pillow above their heads, his nose tucked against Joey's head, his tail resting on JJ's shoulder. Joey's eyes blinked open and he walked closer, taking a seat on the bed. Hi honey, he whispered, stroking JJ's arm. Hi Rob, she whispered back. JJ couldn't sleep, so I told him the story about Mommy and Bran at homecoming. Remember when you told me? He nodded and she yawned, and the one about Auntie Sansa and the little bird. Thank you, he said. I'm going to take JJ home, all right? You should wake him up, Joey said. I think he wanted to wait for you, but he was too sleepy. Where's Will? He's downstairs with your mommy, he told her. Mommy said you're not having another baby, Joey told him. She's right, he said. Oh, Joey said. I'm sorry. He couldn't help but smile at her. That's okay, honey. Will and JJ keep me pretty busy, don't you think? She giggled. Yeah. Should we get you into your own bed? He asked her. She nodded sleepily, removing her arm from JJ's. He stood up and carried her over to her bed, Chatty standing up too and hopping over, yelling at him all the while to be careful with his charge. Rob, she asked as he pulled the covers up. Yeah honey, he smoothed her hair. Do you want another baby? She asked. I'd want you, he almost said, because it felt like that was what she was asking, and besides it was the truth. Maybe someday, he told her instead. But I'm really lucky. I'm surrounded by kids I love a lot. JJ and Will, she nodded. And Kitty, he agreed, and stroked her cheek. And you? She smiled at that and tugged his arm gently. He leaned forward and she pressed a kiss to his cheek, Chatty's tail batting him in the face. Night honey, he said and stood up. He went back over to JJ, his features were smooth with sleep. It was so easy to think that these things affected him less than Will, but they didn't, he just didn't have the right words for them yet. He would have to help him with that. The difference between picking JJ and Joey up was stark, but the weight, the solidity of him was comforting. He breathed in his JJ smell and he stroked his back as he walked through the hall. Grey Wind was no longer at the landing, he had gone downstairs, and they creaked underneath him as he walked down with heavy footsteps. When he got back into the living room, Marcella was sitting on the couch with Will, Grey Wind standing guard. They both looked at him when he entered and he tried to smile. Be careful outside, she warned, it's icy. You might want to wake him up. He shook his head. I've got him. I'll put his shoes in a little bag with the food, she said, then turned to Will. Do you want to grab your jackets from the closet? Will nodded. Yeah, okay. Okay, she stroked his hair. We can talk more tomorrow, okay? I'm around. Maybe we'll take Grey Wind for a nice long walk. Will nodded, clenching his jaw. He was about to tell him to say thank you, but it died on his tongue. It wasn't that he didn't want Will to be grateful to her, or that he wasn't, but there were certain things you wanted your children to be able to take for granted, and all at once her love was one of them. She took Will's cheeks in her hands and pressed a kiss to his forehead before standing up and nudging him to as well. He looked like a lost little puppy, oversized maybe, but a puppy all the same. Then Will, master of the one-armed hug, wrapped both of his arms around her neck, tucking his face against her cheek. Oh sweet boy, she murmured, her arms wrapping around him immediately. And then Will did something that he hadn't seen him do in years. He started to cry. Not just cry, sob. His chest finally tore in two, watching it happen. Myrcella might have looked panicked, but she didn't, just terribly, terribly sad. Will's knees buckled, as though he'd been holding far too heavy a weight for far too long, and he watched as he gave her all of it. Myrcella didn't let go, but she eased them down, until she was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, Will crumpled against her. She was rocking him back and forth, and he wasn't telling her that he wasn't a baby. Her lips were to his ear, saying something to him as the sobs racked his body again and again. Grey Wind was whining, as distraught as he was to see this. He walked over to the couch, and laid JJ down on it, covering him with a blanket. He then went and sat on the floor next to them, his hand cupping Will's head, resting atop Myrcella's. Why? Will was asking again and again. He watched as tears fell down Myrcella's cheeks, rocking him still. I can't tell you why, she told him. It doesn't make any sense, it will never make any sense. But I'm going to tell you something that I wish someone had told me, okay? Will nodded, still crying but comforted slightly by the sound of her voice. She took a steadying breath and said, sometimes, when we don't get enough love from the places we're supposed to, we can be tricked into thinking that it's nowhere to be found, that maybe we just don't deserve it. But it isn't true. We just have to look somewhere else. And it isn't right, and it isn't fair, and it isn't our fault. But we can't do anything about that. All we can do is look around us and try our best to see. Will took a deep breath and said, I know where it is, and then he released another sob, and burrowed into her deeper. Chapter 17. Summary. Thank you to all those who commented on the last chapter. I hope you're all still enjoying this story. Chapter text. It had been a tough day, as he knew it would be. The boys had essentially woken up with hangovers, and he wasn't entirely sure that he hadn't either. Will was sullen and withdrawn, snappy. JJ had been clingy and babyish, as though a part of him had regressed to the age he had been when his mother left the first time. He had thought about cancelling on Sangza for tonight, knowing that none of them would be very much fun, but he had stopped himself because he wanted the kids to be reminded that they had a family, that it wasn't just them. That it wasn't just him. It was impossible not to feel inadequate when it was clear how big a hole Roslyn had left in their lives, and he hated her for that. He hated her for it for them most of all, but for himself too. He was a good dad, he knew that, and because of her his best would never be enough. So they had driven over, JJ sitting in the front seat, Will quiet in the back, Grey Wind's head resting on his lap trying to silently convey that he was here too. One of Sangza's charities had a fundraiser that day, so she was still dressed for it. Her only concession had been to swap her heels for slippers. Myrcella had offered to cook tonight and have everyone over either to her house or his, but Sangza wouldn't hear anything about it. There was no real tension, he didn't think, between them, but Sangza was used to being the hostess. And a part of him wondered if she wasn't a little jealous, the way the boys gravitated towards Myrcella. For so long she had been the woman in their lives, and they adored her, but Myrcella was there now too. He wished the boys could understand that. That their aunt loved them so much that the idea of them preferring another woman's her best friend's brownies to her own pissed her off. Kitty was doing her best, trying to engage her cousins in play. Will was a non-starter, but JJ could usually be convinced into just about anything by her. JJ didn't want to leave him though, leaning his back against his legs and playing with his hands as he suggested playing I Spy in the kitchen with everyone. She was disappointed, but like her mother loved a challenge, so when Sangza said, I spy with my little eye something silver, it started her on a hunt. He and John started suggesting ridiculous things, making Sangza laugh and Kitty scowl. JJ was half-heartedly guessing, turning midway and wrapping his arms around his waist. His heart constricted and he rubbed his back in slow, purposeful movements until he saw JJ's eyes close, burrowing his face against his stomach. They still hadn't gotten it when Marcella and Joey came in. The dogs all went crazy, and the girls came in with bright, identical smiles. Kitty ran to Joey and they wrapped their arms around each other. They still had very little in common, but they had grown to love each other. Kitty enjoyed shocking younger and quieter Joey, and for her part, no one made Joey laugh like Kitty. Sorry we're late, Marcella said to Sangza as they kissed each other's cheeks. We went to that new bookstore downtown and lost track of time. Oh, is it good? Sangza asked. It's amazing, Auntie Sangza, Joey told her. They have 3 whole floors and one of them is all for kids. You are going to love it. They also sell cappuccinos. Oh, books and coffee. I like the sound of that, a latte, Sangza noted. Joey giggled and wrapped her arms around her waist. You look so pretty. Did you take everyone's money? He and John chuckled as Sangza explained that yes, in fact, she had taken everyone's money. Marcella reached into her bag and pulled out a check. She'd been invited to the event, he was pretty sure, but she didn't like to have plans away from Joey on the weekends. Well, guess what? Joey said. Will was silent, petting Lady. It wasn't entirely clear that he had heard her. Will, he said. His son looked up at him and he said, Joey's talking to you. Oh, he said, and then turned to her. What's up, Joe? I got a new mythology book. The one where they, what do they do, Mommy? She asked. Modernize them, Marcella told them both. Tell the same story but in a modern setting. Will silently nodded and Joey asked, could we read it after dinner? I don't know, Will said, maybe. It was a testament to how sweet Will was with Joey, that every adult in the room took notice of this exchange. For most preteens it was pretty standard, from what he'd seen. Usually though, no matter what mood Will was in, he always found a way to be kind to Joey. It often didn't even seem like something he was consciously doing, she brought it out in him without effort. So it was a little startling to hear his tone of voice. Were it anyone else who had used it on her, Joey would have shut down immediately, but she trusted Will so implicitly that she continued on. Her voice was gentle and coaxing when she told him, they have your favorite one. I said maybe, Will snapped. Will, he warned. He wasn't sure if it was Will's reaction or his own that did it, but Joey's eyes widened and her lips pursed, the way she looked when she was trying not to cry. Marcella stepped forward but John got there first, picking her up and said, let's go wash your hands and then I want to see that book. He got her out of the room so quickly, that it wasn't possible for any of them to know whether tears had come or if he had staved them off. Sorry, he mouthed at Marcella and she waved him off, her eyes on Will. She went over and crouched down, petting Lady too. Hey, she said. Hi, he said. I've been thinking about you, she told him. You said we'd take a walk today, he noted. I'm sorry, Marcella said, I wasn't sure if you wanted to and then I lost track of time. I should have called you though. She had called. She had called him and he had told her that everyone was out of sorts and that he thought it was better if they just saw them tonight. She was covering for him and she hadn't thought twice about it. Whatever, Will sighed, standing up. It's no big deal. Ella, JJ said, do you have my train? She was still crouching down but she turned to JJ and nodded, giving a scrunchy-eyed smile and standing up. She went over to one of the totes she had brought in and pulled it out and offered it to him. Here you go, my love, she said. Thank you, he hugged her and then ran to show Sangza, look Auntie Sangza. Mommy bought this for me. Isn't it cool? Oh wow, is that Thomas? Sangza asked gamely. No, Will cut in, it's Gordon. You don't even like Gordon, JJ. Yes I do. JJ argued. No, Will said. You liked Percy. Not Gordon. Percy. He was green and little. This was approximately what he had wanted to shout at Roslyn yesterday, but it was heartbreaking to see Will say it to JJ. Will, it's fine, he told him. No, it's not fine, Will told him. The next few things happened very quickly, and yet he saw them in slow motion. Will went to yank the toy out of JJ's hand. He was stronger than JJ and it should have been easy, but JJ was gripping it tightly, as though somehow he had been expecting this to happen even though nobody else had. He shouted something, to get them to stop, and it surprised them both, and somehow the toy train went flying through the air. At the same time, John and Joey were coming back into the kitchen. Ursula and Sangza both tried to get Joey's attention to move, as Ursula tried to beat the toy as it headed towards her daughter's perfect, golden head. Will and JJ were suspended in disbelief, as was he, knowing that there was no way he could hope to intercept it. John thankfully was not frozen and catching sight of the toy and the commotion, picked Joey up and out of the way. The train sailed by them, into the hallway, where it fell with such a clatter that every dog in the house stood up and ran towards it barking. It was clear then that John had been able to keep Joey from crying, because the way her tears came so quickly made it obvious she had been holding them in, that they were right there on the surface just looking for an opportunity. They had frightened the daylights out of her, out of all of them. Somehow he had already envisioned them in the emergency room that night. John released Joey to Ursula, who caught her as she leapt at her, all of her limbs wrapping around her in perfect synchronization. "Shusha, you had a fright," Ursula told her. "Did it hit you at all?" He watched until he saw Joey shake her head no, and then Ursula brought her out of the room, cooing words of reassurance at her all the while, telling her to let it out, that it was okay to be afraid, that she was going to be alright. "I'm sorry." Will started to follow them. "Will," he warned, and his son turned to look at him. He could see how sorry he was, how ashamed he was. Never in his wildest dreams would he want to hurt or frighten Joey. He was possibly as scared as she was. But he didn't want to make excuses for him. He didn't want to smooth this over, no matter what parental instinct was screaming at him to. It was better, in the long run, he knew, for him to feel this shame, for him to remember what it felt like, the consequences of losing control. No matter what he was feeling, he didn't get to frighten little girls. "Give her a minute and then you can apologize." "Mommy, can I go see if Joey is okay?" Kitty asked. "Why don't you wait in here?" Kitten John suggested. Then looked at him and Sangza. Then Stage whispered, "Can we talk?" Kitty giggled at him, but JJ and Will were still looking through the wall, which they knew Ursula and Joey were on the other side of. He and Sangza went over to John. "I don't think a family dinner is the right thing right now," John said. "I can take them home," he told them, wishing that he had cancelled after all. "No," Sangza argued. "No, that's not what I mean," John said. "I just don't think that all of us sitting around a table right now is going to get us anywhere. I think we should set the kids up with dinner in front of a movie." "Yeah," he sighed, "I think that's probably a good idea. Let's see if Ursula wants to stay and then we'll figure out what to put on." Will came over to them. "I'm sorry." "I know," he squeezed his shoulder. "If it's broken I'll buy you a new one out of my allowance," JJ Will determined. JJ ran into the hall to retrieve it and came back holding it. The toy looked unscathed, though he was sure it had scuffed the floor. "Dad, did I like Gordon?" JJ asked him. His stomach twisted. "He wasn't your favorite." "Maybe she thought it was Thomas," John suggested. "He liked Percy," Will said stubbornly. "Auntie Sangza made him a costume. Remember?" "Oh yeah," JJ smiled. Kitty must have snuck out of the room, because when Joey and Ursula returned, she was clasping Joey's hand. Joey's cheeks were tear-stained, her eyes bloodshot, but to her credit she didn't wince when Kitty dragged her right up to the boys. "They have something to say to you," Kitty announced. "I'm sorry," Joe Will told her, "I lost my grip. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." "Sorry Joe," JJ offered too. Joey's brow knit and she looked at Will. "You should apologize to JJ too. It's his toy." His eyes caught on John, who pumped his fist slightly and mouthed something like "fuck yeah." He would have laughed at any other time, but he was just so exhausted, and it was particularly exhausting to see a 6-year-old with a better sense of right and wrong than Roslyn. Will dutifully followed Joey's instruction and said to JJ, "I'm sorry, JJ." JJ shrugged and handed him the toy. "It's okay. I don't like Gordon anyway." Ella, Will said. His eyes went to Ursula and she looked from Joey to Will and shook her head. I know you didn't mean to scare her. They decided to set the kids up in front of the television, bowls of chicken pot pie, and a separate mini pie that Sangza had made for Joey and Ursula just with vegetables, and a little tray with cut-up vegetables. There weren't the usual arguments about what to watch, they all just settled in. Joey seemed to have recovered pretty quickly, sitting next to Will on the couch as he pushed the dogs away from trying to sniff her bowl. With the reduced group he, Ursula, Sangza and John decided to sit at the kitchen table. 2 doors in between them and the kids seemed like the real reason. They sat down and helped themselves. There was no bottle of wine on the table, all of them were already exhausted. He waited for the onslaught. John and Sangza were on edge, the way they always got when they knew they were out of the loop. They didn't do well with not being able to help. Is Joey okay? He asked Ursula, both because he wanted to know and also because he was trying to delay the rounds and rounds of questions that he would be getting. She looked at him and nodded, her hand reaching out and covering his for a second. She's fine, it just surprised her, and she really hates seeing Will and JJ fight. Ursula smiled, her hand now gesturing, it messes with her equilibrium or something. I'll pull Will aside later, I'm sorry, I just couldn't tell him it was okay in front of her. He remembered something John had told him once. About Sangza and how he had gotten so lucky, because he knew that he loved her more than anything but somehow he hadn't asked her the big questions about raising kids, and somehow more often than not they were on the same page about how they wanted to do it, certainly for the big things. And how he had looked around at all their friends who were having problems, and almost all of them were because they disagreed on those fundamental things. He nodded, yeah, of course. He's hurting, Sangza noted. Yeah, he's hurting badly, he agreed, and he doesn't get to take it out on JJ or Joey or anyone. And Joey isn't going to hear any of us tell a boy that it is okay to scare her or potentially hurt her just because he's upset. Ursula was looking at him strangely and he raised his eyebrows at her. She nodded then shallowly and said, no, yes. You're right. That's exactly, yes. Sangza's eyes widened and she shook her head, I didn't mean. Of course you didn't. Ursula waved her off. It's just something I have to think about. And then she looked at him, and it means a lot that you're thinking about it too. His stomach warmed and he wondered how much of the day would have been better if he had told Ursula and Joey to come over after all. He hadn't wanted them to see the boys like that, or him for that matter, but he wondered if they wouldn't have been like that if Ursula and Joey had come around. He hadn't realized that Ursula's off-handed comment would have stuck with Will as a promise, and thinking about it now he imagined that at least some of Will's feelings had been about not seeing her. He always thought of them like a balm, but they were more than that. They didn't just make them feel better, they made them behave better, their presence demanding each of them to not just get stuck in thinking about themselves. Of course, he said. It's not of course, Ursula corrected him and then looked at Sangza, and I understand wanting to make it okay for Will, and I know that he'd rather skin himself alive than hurt her, and I don't expect everyone to be as crazy about it as I am. But she looks to me for so many things and I'm trying to be really purposeful about the words I choose around her. And then she tried to lighten the mood by groaning, Dr. Dane is such a pest about it. He chuckled, as did Sangza and John. Ursula loved her therapist, but she talked about her like an overbearing older sister. Sometimes when she was particularly firm about something one of them would say because Dr. Dane said so, because she was nearly dogmatic about adhering to the recommendations her therapist made. It was so her, to try to get an A in therapy, but he knew that behind her perfectionist nature was just a deep desire to heal. And it was something he had been thinking about last night. Something he had lain awake thinking about, amongst all the other things that kept him from the sleep he'd been craving. It had haunted him to the point where he had gotten out of bed, gone into the hall, stood in Will's doorway. That had happened twice, but he had stopped himself from walking in both times. Because Ursula was so careful with her words, and she had chosen them correctly. Not just with Joey, he noted. Her eyes met his and for a moment he could picture her tossing and turning too. He wondered if she had put on her slippers. If she'd put on her coat. Yeah, she agreed. What do you mean? John asked. Her brow knit and her eyes widened, 2 things he would have thought couldn't happen in tandem. Will was pretty devastated last night, he told John and Sangza, and Elle was comforting him, and she was just really purposeful about what she chose to say, and not say to him. Sangza looked at Myrcella, what was it? Then looked around, I mean, I feel like we should all be consistent. Shouldn't we? He wished Will and JJ could see this, too. 3 other adults they loved dearly sitting around a table talking about how to help them. Myrcella closed her eyes for a moment and rubbed her temple. It's going to sound really bad. But he was asking why. You know why Roslyn would leave them, and I can't explain that, none of us can. So instead I told him that there was so much love for him elsewhere. And I didn't. She didn't tell him that Roslyn loves him, he said. She acknowledged that Roslyn wasn't giving him the love that he should have. John was looking at Sangza, but reached out and squeezed Myrcella's arm reassuringly. John knew as well as her that sometimes love came not from a blood relative but an adopted one. Rob's own father had shown it to him first, and then Arthur Dane. He wondered if anybody had ever thought to tell him what Myrcella had told Will last night. Likely not. He looked over at Sangza and saw her frowning. Sangza, he asked. She shook her head. I'm not going to tell a child that their mother doesn't love them. That's going to fuck them up. There was silence then. She said the thing that all parents were terrified of. The idea of fucking up their children through stupidity and good intentions. Les, Myrcella said after a few long moments. What? Sangza asked. I said it's going to fuck him up, Les, Myrcella clarified. She looked at John briefly and then back to him and Sangza and said, look, I loved your parents. They took me in as their own. Both of us. John backed her up. Myrcella looked at John and nodded, and I always felt love coming from them. And I don't blame them for anything. They did what they thought was right and they were such pillars of support and I am so grateful. You can say it, Ella, he assured her. We know you loved them. Myrcella looked at him and then at Sangza and reached across the table and offered her hand. Sangza reached out and clasped it and then Myrcella covered their hands with her other one. They didn't want to upset me any further, and so when things were really bad, after your dad had given me one of his hugs and your mom had brushed my hair and tucked me in, one of them inevitably would promise at my parents that my father loved me. My mother does, my father didn't. But what I know now is that regardless of how they did or didn't feel about me, that is not what love is supposed to look like. Sangza covered Myrcella's hand with her own, rubbing it gently. She wasn't entirely convinced, he knew that. Sangza was one of the best mothers he knew, one of the kindest and most caring, and definitely one of the stubbornest people, and it was inconceivable to her that a mother might not love her children. That a child might not need to be assured of it. If they hadn't said that, Sangza ventured. I don't know, Myrcella shrugged, and I don't blame them. John probably got the same talk and he ended up in a wonderful, loving relationship. It isn't the only factor, not even close. I just wish, we spend so much of our childhood, so much of our lives, hearing that there is no love like a parent's, like a mother's love. And I knew the love that your parents gave you, that they gave me, was different than what mine did. But I kept hearing over and over again they love you and I didn't feel it. So when someone else came along, and he told me he loved me even when all of his other words and actions proved otherwise, that wasn't an entirely new sensation. It was one I recognized and maybe even one that I unknowingly sought. Sangza sat in silence for a moment and then got up out of her chair and walked around the table, wrapping her arms around Myrcella's neck from behind, leaning her cheek on top of her head. Myrcella smiled, stroking Sangza's arm. I don't blame anyone but myself, and Gadri, she promised Sangza, but then she looked at him, and I can't make Roslyn be a good mother, all I can do is try to help him understand that she isn't one and that it isn't his fault. It wasn't your fault, Sangza told her. Actually some of it was, Myrcella argued, and that's okay. Because nothing I did will ever justify what they did, or what he did. I don't have to be blameless to have deserved better. He felt John's gaze on him and he turned to look at him. He wasn't entirely sure what that look said, except for him to wipe off whatever look was on his own. That wasn't possible though. She was getting better. She was working so hard at it, and it was incredible. So many people tried to look for a way out, a way to justify their own actions that made them somehow morally superior. She was morally superior, to just about everyone, and she knew it didn't absolve her, and knew that nothing she had ever done should have condemned her either. It wasn't going to be today, or tomorrow, but she was going to be better, she was going to be healed, and that in itself was a wonderful thing. But he wasn't morally superior, nowhere near it, and so of course what followed was a selfish thought. That not today and not tomorrow, but sometime maybe not too long from now, he would be able to tell her how he felt about her. That she would be in a place to hear it, that she might be able to reciprocate it. So he wasn't sure what his face looked like, but he was positive he couldn't do a thing to control it. "You're right about that," he told her. "All of it, actually. I'll take Will aside," she promised. "I'll tell him you called earlier to see if he wanted to take a walk," he told her. Her eyes closed and she smiled briefly. "You don't have to." He thought about Will telling him that Marcella would never leave Joey behind. He thought about Will telling him she was just that kind of mom. He thought about him asking Marcella why, and her telling him she didn't know. He thought about her telling Will to look for love elsewhere and him telling her that he had found it. He thought about Joey asking him if he'd ever want another kid, and how he'd wanted to tell her that he would always want her. And he thought about Marcella sitting in her therapist's office every week getting better, and the look on his face. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Chapter 18. Summary. Hey y'all. I'd love to hear from you if you're still enjoying this. This is just a short, sweet breather chapter after the heaviness of the last few. I hope you like it. Chapter text. It was the hardest thing he'd done in some time. But he had made a promise, and that was still worth something. To him, anyway. Joey's words were like the wind apparently. Because when Marcella said then, Mrs. Hornsugel, Joey erupted into giggles even though they had sworn they wouldn't. This caused him to laugh too, watching the way her laughter went silent, her mouth open in a frozen mask of mirth. Though they were both laughing, he was the only recipient of Marcella's glare. "I'm not laughing at the name," he clarified, "I'm laughing at Joey." Marcella rolled her eyes, dramatically shutting the book and placing it on the nightstand. "You two don't deserve a book." Joey giggled and rolled more firmly against his chest. They were all sitting in her bed, Joey's teeth were brushed and pajamas were on, and the pair of them had been prolonging this last activity of the day by laughing at the name of the main character in a book Joey was supposed to read for school. "Rob," Joey asked, "will you tell me a mommy story?" He mused, rubbing her back as he thought of one. "Do you want one from when she was your age?" "Yes please," Joey yawned, snuggling into him, her little fingers playing with the fraying neck of his sweater. "All right," he grinned, very studiously not looking at Marcella, "so this one time we went skiing, dash." "Rob." Marcella laughed, "No." "Rob." Joey grinned, "Yes." He shrugged at Marcella helplessly, "It's 2 against 1. "As it has been all evening," she laughed, nudging his leg with her toe, "see if you ever get invited back." He grinned at her. She was petting a purring Chatty who had taken advantage the moment she'd discarded the book and crawled into her lap, his paws on her shoulders as he nuzzled against her cheek. Their eyes lingered on one another, and he saw a blush run up her cheek before she buried it in Chatty's fur. "So," he said, "we all went skiing. Your mommy was a little precocious. She didn't want to be on the kiddie trails because she had learned how to ski when she was still in diapers. And well, I guess maybe she should have stayed in them." Marcella snorted into Chatty's fur and admonished him, laughing, "Rob." He was pretty proud of himself for that one. "So me, Uncle Goblin and Theon agreed to take her up in the gondola," he went on. "Everything was going great. Then, tragedy. Zeddy horror," Joey offered in the ambiguous accent the kids had created. "Exactly," he grinned, "so we're about halfway up the mountain when the gondola stops. We think it's just because the wind is going a bit wild. But we're up there another 10 minutes, and then another 10 after that. I looked over at your mommy and well, she looked a little worried." Joey turned and looked at her. "But you love the gondola." "That's true," Marcella agreed. "I'm fearless, a beacon of strength some have said when it comes to heights." "Who said that?" he asked. "Chatty, maybe," Joey told him. Marcella laughed in surprise. "Rob, finish your story and stop corrupting my daughter." He chuckled. "Okay, so we end up being in the gondola for close to an hour, and I keep asking your mommy if she is okay, because she looks pretty distressed at this point. Even Theon is trying to make her feel better, and she finally gets so frustrated with us that she tells us that she isn't scared, she just really has to pee. And then they did everything they could to make me, Myrcella piped up. Joey's mouth popped open. Rob. It was mostly Theon, he evaded. You made me laugh, Myrcella argued. Well, I'm hilarious and I won't apologize for that, he noted, making them both giggle. Anyway, we finally got up the mountain, and your mommy is wiggling, hopped out of the gondola, leaving her skis for us to carry. Just giving you an opportunity to make yourself useful, Myrcella suggested. And got all the way out onto the top of the mountain, slipped and peed right in her ski pants lying on the snow, he finished. Oh mommy, Joey turned in concern, but couldn't quite manage it and let out a giggle. That's awful. It was very embarrassing, Myrcella allowed, then added primly, there was pee in my ski boots by the time I got home. Oh my god, he sputtered out a laugh. Joey grinned up at him and then snuggled back in. Can you tell another? It's time for bed, baby, Myrcella told her gently. Okay mommy, Joey agreed dutifully. Good night, Rob. Night honey, he kissed her hair and gave her a good hug and then stood up and plopped her giggling back into bed. Chatty started yelling at him, as he settled himself on her pillows, and Myrcella pulled the covers up and pressed a kiss to Joey's cheek as her daughter wrapped her arms around her. See you in dreamland, Joey told her. Yes you will, girlfriend, Myrcella said, but for reasons unknown I'll be pretending to be a penguin. Joey giggled, I won't give you away, I promise. They headed towards the door, stepping over Grey Wind, and he turned out the light. They were quiet on the way down and went immediately to the kitchen table and started clearing it from dinner. I could be a vegetarian if everything tasted like this, he said, sticking a fork into the main dish as he brought it into the kitchen. Myrcella laughed as she turned on the sink. You eat red meat 3 times a week. Well, except for those nights then, he suggested. She smiled, pushing up her sleeves. I'm glad you liked it. I had to make something special after Joey wrangled you into joining us. Yeah, she really twisted my arm, he offered sarcastically as he went to keep clearing the table. The truth was, it hadn't taken any convincing, only an invitation, and they both knew it. It had been a better week. The first one after Roslyn had come was still bumpy, the boys showing residual signs of it in different ways. Will had been better after he'd had some time with Myrcella, after he had made it clear that she hadn't forgotten or chosen not to see him, and had spent most of his afternoons that week at her house, playing with Joey or doing his homework while she read or drew quietly. He had wanted to keep JJ busy, so had booked him a lot of playdates, so his nanny had worked the easiest week of her life. This one, the second one, had been much better, things returning to normal except for a random question from JJ here and there. It had been so much better that individually, both boys had asked him if they could sleep over at a friend's house tonight. When JJ had told Myrcella and Joey yesterday, Joey had asked him what he was going to do with the boys gone. He hadn't had a plan, and he told her so, and her face had fallen and she had invited him immediately, not wanting him to be alone. He had sort of been hoping they would ask, but hadn't wanted to push into their plans by asking himself. They started cleaning the kitchen in relative quiet. He took up the spot at the sink while Myrcella put things away. He saw her making containers of leftovers for him and the boys. So, are you ready for Sunday? He asked her, when she came and leaned her back against the counter grabbing a dish towel to dry. She was silent for a moment, and then told him, I don't know. I need to clean the house. He chuckled, that's not what I meant. She smiled a close-lipped smile and nodded, yeah, I know. I'm looking forward to seeing him. Are you asking me? He asked her. She sighed, no. I know it sounds crazy, but I miss him. He's your grandfather. I'm sure he'd be thrilled to know that you miss him, he suggested, or whatever the Tywine equivalent of thrilled is. They had known for a couple of months that Tywine would be coming. His visit had been changed a few times. He was coming up here for business, or so he said, and things had kept getting rescheduled. He was the first of her family that she was going to see since she had left King's Landing. Tommen had wanted to come up, but he had heard from Sansa that Myrcella had asked him to stay away. It had been when things were at their worst with Joey, when she wasn't telling the truth about her needs, when neither of them were eating or sleeping well. He wasn't sure if anyone else had reached out, but he knew that she called her mother once a week the same way she had when she was down south. It made sense, in a way, that Tywin was going to be the first. The Lannisters all followed his lead, and he wouldn't put it past them to have a strategy for even this. He tried to imagine what he would do if one of his siblings had asked him to stay away. Tommen was a good guy, or at least, he had always been a sweet kid, but he couldn't find it in him to blame it on him being younger. Rickon was the youngest but the bravest and stubbornest of all the Stark children. If one of his sisters and their child was in obvious distress, there was nothing that would keep him away. So it was a big deal that Tywin was coming, and he wasn't sure what it would mean. If it would open the floodgates or lock them forever. He imagined that uncertainty was adding to her nerves about the whole thing. She smiled, yeah. He turned off the water for a minute and wiped his hands, turning so that his side was resting against the counter. You don't have to ask him, he reminded her, or I can suggest it to him. She shook her head. He'll shoot it down immediately if you do. Why, he asked, he likes me. She grinned, or whatever the Tywin equivalent is. Yes, he does. But I'm the one asking, and he'll say that if I want something then I should stand by it enough to ask for it myself. Besides, I don't like the idea of talking to him through a lawyer. Even if it is you. His dad had once told him that Myrcella was her grandfather's favorite. He couldn't remember how it had come up, it must have been after some time they were all together. At the time, he had chalked it up to Myrcella being everyone's favorite except Cersei's, but he understood it a little better now. She had been what Tywin wanted all his descendants to be, intelligent, poised, brave and obedient. Of course she was his favorite. He wondered what their relationship had looked like these past years. He imagined that her intelligence and poise had covered for any deficiencies in the other virtues. Not to say that Myrcella wasn't brave, she was the bravest person he had ever met, but in recent years it was not a kind of bravery Tywin would recognize. It was the last that haunted him though. Obedient. She had never said it outright, except to say that her family had been thrilled with the match, but he wondered how much of her falling for Gendry had been the result of them pushing her towards him. Fair enough, he said, but let me do the haggling at least. She nodded and looked up at him. Do you think he'll do it? I think that depends on how honest you are with him, he admitted. She opened her mouth and then shut it again before saying, I think that is what I am nervous about. Telling him, he asked. She shook her head. No, I've gotten pretty good at that. But, what if I tell him everything and I ask and he says no? What does that say about how he feels about me? I don't know that I want to know. If it were any other grandfather, this wouldn't even be a conversation. Grandpa Tully would have given up everything for him or any of his siblings. Sansa had made him a needlepoint belt once and he had worn it almost every day for the rest of his life. Tywin Lannister wasn't any other grandfather though. He was shrewd and ambitious, and believed in legacy over nearly everything else. So, it was entirely possible that his only granddaughter, his favorite grandchild, could ask him for help keeping her daughter away from a violent and abusive man and he would say no. I don't blame you, that would be terrible, he told her, but if that happens, we're going to find another way, and you're going to lean on the people who would do anything for you. She looked up at him and asked, like you? I was thinking JJ, but sure I'm around, he nodded. She smiled and then giggled, you're an idiot. Got you to laugh, though, he said, his thumb stroking her cheek before he could stop any part of himself. Her breath caught and his blood thrummed as her eyes widened slightly. More and more things like this were happening. There was a charge between them, and he didn't think it was just on his part. He had started just ignoring Jon and his glares entirely. He knew that it wasn't the right time, and he wasn't going to make any kind of move on her, but he wasn't entirely sure that he should be fully hiding how he was feeling. And regardless, he knew that he couldn't, so the point was moot. He cleared his throat and retracted his hand, turning the sink back on. They finished the dishes and then she gave him a towel to dry his hands. Do you want to watch a movie or something? She asked him. Sure, he agreed, feeling suddenly a bit awkward. She seemed to as well, but lead him back into the living room. He sat down on the couch first, not wanting to be the one to choose how close they sat together, and tried not to smile when she plopped down right next to him. What? She asked as she grabbed the remote, placing her fuzzy sock-clad feet up on the coffee table. He leaned back and set his feet up there as well and shook his head. No, nothing. What do you feel like watching? Okay, she grinned, turning towards him. They were so close together, their shoulders were touching and she was looking up at him a bit mischievously. He wanted to suck on her bottom lip, bury his hands in her hair, his face in her neck. Her eyebrows raised slightly and she said, "So there's this scary movie I've been too chicken to watch on my own. Want to give it a try?" He smirked, "Sure." She smiled at him, her eyes lingering for a moment before she turned back to the television and navigated to the movie. He had seen previews for it and it had looked good, not just gore, but like there was actual suspense to it too. Ursula placed the remote down on the coffee table and grabbed a blanket and then looked behind the couch. "What are you doing?" he asked her. "Just checking," she reasoned. He chuckled and nodded and she settled in beside him. She offered him some blanket which he passed on, not sure that he trusted his hands not to wander underneath it. "You, that's pretty," Ursula mused of the opening scene. "For now," he intoned in a deep, monster voice. She giggled and shoved him but then held onto his arm, wrapping hers around it and pulling it towards her so that his forearm rested on her lap. He felt like he wasn't breathing normally or something, but she didn't seem to notice. "Oh, he's creepy," she noted of a new character. "It's a misdirect," he suggested. "Yeah," she asked and he nodded. "I'll believe that when he shows up dead." Tough crowd. It continued on like this for some time, until it started getting more suspenseful. When the first murder happened, it wasn't quite gory but it was long. Ursula curled into him, her head against his shoulder, her soft hair against his cheek, tickling his neck. "Is it over?" she asked after a moment. "The movie?" he teased. She laughed. "The scene?" "Oh yeah, he's very dead," he allowed. She peeked her head up and looked at the screen. Then his arm was being lifted and she was leaning against his chest, resting her head on it. Her arm wrapped around his waist, her fuzzy sock toe resting against his leg. He was certain she could feel his heart beating and he did his best to keep it in check. He felt like a teenager, his hormones running wild. "Sorry," she said to his chest, "me and Joey are in snuggly moods, I guess." At that he realized he wasn't holding her at all, and wrapped his arms around her, stroking her hair the way he would Joey's as though that made it innocent. "When I said lean on people who would do anything for you, this isn't exactly what I meant," he teased. She went to get up and he held her to him. She looked up at him and he rubbed her arm. "But I'm not complaining." "You're not?" she asked softly. He could have kissed her then. It was the only thing that made sense to do. He knew a signal when he saw one, and a beautiful woman, laying on your chest, looking up at you the way she was looking at him was a pretty indisputable one. "Watch the movie," he said instead. "You first," she suggested, and it could have been merely teasing but her eyes were wet and her voice was light as though she wasn't breathing normally either. It was harder than not laughing at Mrs. Hornsugel, but he had made a promise to John, and himself, too, not to do this yet. So he rested his chin against her soft hair and forced himself to focus on the screen. She was still for a moment, before she lowered her cheek back to his chest. He stroked her hair and rubbed her back, holding her closer to him to temper what might be seen as rejection. He couldn't focus on the movie, so instead he focused on the rise and fall of her breathing, letting it steady his own as he took in her warm, honey shampoo. "This isn't as scary as I thought it would be," she said after a while. He murmured into her hair. The movie. She snuggled into him deeper, nuzzling so that her temple was against his chin. "Oh, yeah," he cleared his throat, "it's good." There was another moment of silence and then she said, "Actually I have no idea what's happening." He chuckled in surprise and relief and agreed, "Me either." "Let's keep watching," though, she suggested. "Yeah," he agreed, his lips at her temple. She was so thoroughly wrapped in his arms he wasn't even sure she could see the television. She burrowed into him, her leg draping over his. "We're going to see this through." Chapter 19. Summary. The Tywine that was promised. "Please be kind, I always get so intimidating," writing him face with tears of joy. Chapter text. It was almost a relief when Lewis knocked on his door and told him with a pale face that a Mr. Lannister was here to see him. He had been expecting this since he had received Ursula's text the night before, telling him that she had told her grandfather everything. It had taken restraint but he hadn't asked her what Tywine had said, knowing that she would have told him if he had made a determination one way or another. So instead he had kept his day purposefully light, knowing that it was likely that Tywine would show up unannounced to discuss the deal they had in mind. He smoothed his tie and stood up. "You can let him in." Rob had rounded the desk as Tywine came into his office. Though he was ostensibly in the north on business, he was dressed casually. Or as casual as he had ever seen him, in a tweed blazer over a collared sweater and neatly pressed trousers. He looked much the same as he had when he'd last seen him, though that could have been over a decade before. In 10 years from now, he'd likely look unchanged still. "Mr. Lannister," he greeted him with his hand outstretched. "Robb," Tywine said, shaking it firmly with a cold papery hand. "Can we get you tea or coffee?" he asked. Neither. Tywine refused. "Thank you, Lewis, please hold my calls," he said, dismissing his assistant. "Except for the school?" Lewis asked. "Thank you," he said again. Lewis nodded and closed the door, managing not to bang into anything on his way out. Sometime he would tell Myrcella that she frightened his assistant more than her grandfather did. She would get a kick out of it. He brought Tywine over to his desk and retook his seat at it. Though he had a couch, which he liked to utilize for less formal conversations, he was not ready to slouch in front of him. "I trust your family is well," Tywine noted as he took the seat opposite him. The statement surprised him more than his presence, but he nodded. "They are, thank you. I probably should have sent a note after my father's funeral for the arrangement you sent." "Sansa did." "Lovely girl," Tywine told him. Perhaps the surprise showed on his face because Tywine said, "She has always been a very good friend to Myrcella." "Yes sir," he agreed. Tywine looked around his office, which was large and lived in. The exposed brick, the bay window with the antique window panes. He had chosen it because it had seemed antithetical to the sterile law firms he had interned in when he was younger. The conference room had an old wood-burning fireplace that was long out of use, that had a way of lulling opposing counsel into a false sense of comfort. "There are many renowned firms in the north," Tywine told him. "One would have made you a partner by now." "I prefer working for myself," he replied simply. "And you never wanted to expand," Tywine stated, rather than asked. He shrugged. "A partner would have expected to have their way every so often, and associates would have to be trusted to do it my way." Tywine all but smirked at that, and he pressed forward. "But I don't think you came here to talk about my law firm." "My granddaughter is a wealthy woman, I've made sure of it," Tywine told him. "Well connected. And yet she came to me and asked me to represent her, though I only have an assistant and a part-time bookkeeper on my payroll." "And you want to know why?" he suggested. "I would suggest you ask her." "I did," Tywine confirmed sharply. Robb swallowed, unsure of how to proceed. He didn't want to push him too far. They wanted something from him, and it wouldn't do to piss him off too much. Besides, he was Myrcella's grandfather, and though she was pulling away from her family, it would be better in the long run if Tywine didn't hate him. Besides, there was something else. Something nearly impossible to detect unless you knew what to look for. Unless you had experienced it yourself. The tiniest difference in his voice, in his eyes. It was as though something had finally chastened him. "Was this deal your idea?" Tywine asked him. "No," he answered. "Myrcella thought of it about a week after Slynt suggested settling." "But you've gone along with it," Tywine mused. "Why?" "Because I think it's the way of getting her what she wants while giving up as little as possible," he told him. He saw Tywine's eyes flash in anger, and he added, "I'm not telling you that to go at you. I will not allow her to give him her shares," Tywine determined. And his stomach sank. There were the practical reasons. This would mean another round at least of offers. Myrcella would likely have to give up more things that mattered to her, or should anyway. Gendry could find a way to make it hurt. They might even have to bring it back to court. But it wasn't those that made his heart ache. It was Myrcella looking up at him and saying, "What if I tell him everything and I ask and he says no? What does that say about how he feels about me?" It was that which made him hold back a snarl. He smoothed his tie and shifted in his seat, leaning his forearms on his desk, his gaze unflinching and unmasked. "I'm sure it's difficult for you," he told him, "your favorite Lannister having no interest in the family business. But you cannot hold on to her if you make it harder to extricate herself from him. You will break her heart if you try, And let me tell you, in case no one else has ever had the gall to do so, that your legacy is worthless, your company, everything you have ever accomplished is worthless compared to her and the love she and her daughter would give you if you chose them now. My legacy, Tywine practically spat. I gave up on that a long time ago. My children and grandchildren will destroy it before my body is cold. It's a bad deal. Of course it's a bad deal, he snapped. Gendry Faring should be stripped down, flogged and nearly starved to death before he is hung, drawn and quartered. Anything less than that is a bad deal. But Lannister Corporation means little to her and a lot to him, and you have been in enough negotiations to know that symmetry is exactly what you want. He had been surprised when Myrcella had first suggested this deal. That she give Gendry her shares in Lannister Corporation. He was a billionaire in his own right, had companies and subsidiaries, was on the board of multiple other corporations and had plenty of friends in Congress allowing him to control what he wanted to. It made no sense that his interest would be so rabid in a corporation that had long since seen its finest hour. But it was nearly obsessive, the degree to which Gendry followed news of it. Myrcella on the other hand had never cared a thing about it. She had voting shares, so she sat on the board and attended the once-quarterly meetings. She allowed her family to parade her at events where they needed a poised and pretty face in spite of what would wait for her at home, but otherwise took no part in it. So while it was a shitty deal, it was the best one that they could come up with, and the only reason it had taken them so long to suggest it was that Tywine got to sign off on the transfer in ownership of voting-level shares. I introduced them, Tywine told him. He took a deep breath and tried to get a hold of his anger. They still needed Tywine no matter what he thought of him. Look, I know that you all were happy with the match, but... Happy? Tywine sneered. Happy? Is that what she told you? He watched as the older man stood up and started pacing, just like his granddaughter did. Though in Tywine's case it was definitely meant to draw one's attention, and with Myrcella he had never been sure. She was lost. I had never seen her like that. You remember what she was like in high school, in university. The smartest person in her class, an internationally ranked equestrian, a gift for ballet just like her. Of all of them, she was the one I worried least about. Until she graduated early with nothing to do and no plan. Not since her Uncle Jaime had I seen such a waste of talent. She was stubborn, Tywine scoffed, though there was a bit of a twinkle in his eye, so stubborn, and resisted any attempt at guidance on my part. She didn't want a part in the family business. Fine. But that didn't mean she got to do nothing. I thought the opportunity to work in something new and exciting might shake her, so I told Gendry about her. I all but handed him her resume. He felt the color drain out of his cheeks, feeling wholly depleted. He was meant to be her boss, not her husband, he realized. The papers can say what they want about me, I never read any of it, but they have never been able to accuse me of she was a child. He shrugged helplessly, which was disconcerting in a man of his stature. It never occurred to me. Tywine turned his back to him, all that pain, because it never occurred to me. Chastened. It was now the only word for him. He should have pressed his advantage. He should have told him that while he couldn't change the past, he could make amends now, if he only helped her free herself from Gendry. Instead Robb said, "You didn't know." Tywine sighed and turned around. He walked back to the desk and retook his seat. "No, I didn't know," he admitted. "Forgive me, sir," he offered as gently as he was able, with a respect he didn't feel but a sympathy he couldn't temper, "but how is that possible?" Tywine's jaw set, "Because I asked her, and I didn't believe that my granddaughter would lie to me." He felt tears prick his eyes. It was impossible not to think about what Myrcella had endured by the time her grandfather had asked her that. He recalled what she had said about Gendry being good at making her feel trapped in an unlocked room. So trapped that even when someone came to rescue her from it, she dug her fingernails into the walls. "I was angry at her too," he told him. "Livid, really, when she first came back. I'm not sure if she told you that. But she asked for my help anyway, she chose to trust me. And the more I proved worthy of that trust, the more she trusted me still. She lied and she pushed people away, but she isn't lying now. She's asking for help. And we all owe that to her, whatever we can give, because she may have lied, but we let ourselves be duped, and she is the one who suffered for it." Tywine took that in. He could tell that he had wanted to interrupt him more than once, but he hadn't. Instead he sat there and listened. I could just have him killed, Tywine noted. He smirked. You think you're the first one to suggest that? No, Tywine's gaze leveled him. You're in love with her? Yes sir, he confirmed. He hadn't said it in so many words to anyone, and Tywine Lannister would not have been his first choice. However, there was no point in denying it. It was the strongest that he had ever felt for any woman, but he knew that it was almost nothing compared to what he would feel if he got the chance to be with her. Right now he was loving her from a distance, a close distance admittedly, but there was a veil in between them still. Tywine nodded. I thought as much. So I'm sure that you can imagine between that and being her legal counsel, I'm going to try to get you to reconsider, he told him. It's not me who needs to reconsider, Tywine told him smugly, a bit of the old spark back in him. I am not going to allow her to give him the shares. Instead she will give him the opportunity to buy the shares, which was previously precluded by the prenup. This will be a lifetime interest only, and a stipulation will be that they are bequeathed to Joanna in his will. Their eyes locked and Tywine's lips twitched. It wasn't an execution, but it was a better deal. Significantly so. If he refuses, will you allow her to give them to him, keeping in the stipulation about Joey, he asked. Yes, Tywine agreed, but he won't. He then reached into the briefcase he had brought with him and pulled out a small folder, an independent appraiser of the corporation with a fair market value assessment of her shares. Thank you, he said, taking the folder from him, and opened it. He didn't care about the amount, but he wanted to know one thing. He flipped open to the signed declaration. Fair market value as of the 15th of November, 2022. He swallowed and closed the folder. You knew that she would ask for this. In spite of her best efforts, I know, my granddaughter, Tywine told him. Why did you let me yell at you to do something you'd always intended to, he wondered. Tywine fixed him with a look and he chuckled, a bit of due diligence, I get it. He wondered if he showed Myrcella his cheeky side. She would like it. There are a few things I want to go over with you, Tywine noted. Provisions. He nodded and grabbed a pen and his pad of paper. I want it in the agreement that he can never buy more shares. He went to note that and then paused. Write that down. I can hear loud, but I think that's a mistake. Adding stipulations to him is only going to give him something to argue against and make a non-negotiable. We already have something he can negotiate against, paying for the shares. There are ways of limiting him without him knowing until afterward, and they will give you more control in the long run. Tywine sat there for a moment and then said, the board has long challenged me on having the right to review and refuse the sale of minor shares. He couldn't help but smirk. I would think that the pending inclusion of a billionaire with a history of hostile takeovers might warm them to the idea. It was the closest thing to a smile he had ever seen from Tywine. He'll never be able to purchase another share. He nodded and then ventured, and perhaps even more than that, you'll be able to have control of anyone else buying up enough majority shares to get a voting interest. Tywine's eyebrow raised and he shrugged. If I were Gendry and I wanted to take power from you, I wouldn't just want more shares for myself, I would want to fill up seats on the board with lackeys. This will stop him from being able to create a coalition. He would have to take support from you through the members of the existing board. The look Tywine gave him was satisfied enough that he knew that would never happen. He didn't go any further than that, not wanting to know how he could ensure the uttermost loyalty from a group of people with their own ambitions and petty resentments. There were a few other points, one that he was able to talk Tywine out of and one or two that made a lot of sense to include. As they were wrapping up, Robb said, "Thank you, Mr. Lannister. Can I ask one more thing?" Tywine nodded and he said, "I understand why you didn't tell me, but why haven't you told Myrcella? Either months ago when you got the appraisal or last night when she told you everything. Would you believe me if I told you it was because I hadn't ruled out killing him?" Tywine asked him after a moment. He might have smirked, but instead he nodded and admitted, yes. Tywine sighed, habit. Robb's brows raised and Tywine sighed. That's the truth, it's a bad habit. And a bit of pride. He nodded, swallowing his annoyance, and said, she chose me because she trusted that I would prioritize keeping Joey safe with her over winning. All other trusts have stemmed from that one. She chose you, Tywine noted, because she wanted to come home. In the grey of the afternoon light he could see the lines on his face, and for a moment he felt like a fool for not thinking the man had aged. He wouldn't be surprised if some of them had etched themselves only the night before. "Sir, he started, but Tywine waved him off. "Joanna is a special girl," Tywine noted. "That was one thing I agreed with her father about, though I know his methods, but regardless she is 6 years old and I have never known what to say to a 6-year-old. Her mother was guiding the conversation mostly, and suggested she tell me about the friends she had made since coming to the north. The list was long and mostly inane, the things people name their children these days, and when she got to the end of it Myrcella held her hands up and said, "Aren't you forgetting something?" And then pointed behind us, towards your house. Tywine twisted the gold band on his left ring finger, that he still wore though his wife had died when their children were younger than Joey. Joey corrected her. "You asked about friends, not family. Mr. Lannister, I can imagine." "No, you cannot imagine," Tywine corrected him swiftly. "You cannot begin to imagine. I never saw Joanna speak to her father. She never spoke to anyone in his presence. Do you think I am a man unfamiliar with intimidation?" "No, sir," he shook his head. "She never spoke in his presence," Tywine repeated. Then stood up. "I'll see her speak in yours. You and your sons will join us for dinner tonight." Chapter 20. Chapter text. The afternoon had passed by quickly. After Tywine had left his office he had taken a walk around the block and then another, trying to process what had happened. If someone had held a gun to his head, he wasn't sure whether he would have said that Tywine would have helped or not. He could always be counted on to protect his own self-interest, but what was less reliable was what he would think was in it. Not wanting to risk losing the moment, when he returned to his office he drafted a new offer, putting in Tywine's stipulations and sent it off to Castle. He responded within 10 minutes, with nothing more than "Let's go finish this." With that secured, he cleaned up the wording a bit and printed off 3 copies. He had kept it simple, not wanting to give Tywine an excuse to run it by his own lawyers and making sure to honor the language he had given him. Myrcella had texted saying, "I hear you and the boys are joining us for dinner, be prepared for a grilling, though I'm making a roast." From that, it sounded like Tywine hadn't told her that he had made his decision, because clearly the grilling she meant wasn't the one that her grandfather intended. He had no idea what the man was waiting for, and though this morning he would have laughed if someone had suggested moral support, the somewhat humbled version of him he had met with made it seem not entirely out of the realm of possibility. He was doing the right thing, but perhaps it had been so long that he needed help remembering exactly how to accomplish it. For Myrcella's sake, he would have liked him to put her out of her misery. Selfishly, though, he couldn't help but hope to be there. Not to get any credit or anything, just to see the look on her face when she realized she could open that unlocked door and walk right out. He left work early, wanting to make sure the boys looked presentable. For a dinner with Myrcella and Joey, they'd go over in sweatpants, and while he wasn't going to put them in collared shirts, he wanted to make sure at least that their t-shirts weren't stained and their hands were clean. Will was in a good mood because he'd gotten an A on a book report, and JJ was in a good mood because he was JJ. There was only slight pushback when he had them put on shirts Sansa had bought them instead of the t-shirts they'd both worn in their respective gym classes. He had less success trying to leave Grey Wind at their house, his dog pushing his way out the door and the boys looking at him like he was crazy for trying to stop him in the first place. He relented, because Tywine wanted to see him and his family interact with Myrcella and Joey, and there was no denying that Grey Wind was a part of it. If they showed up without him, there was a good chance he'd been walking back a minute later to go get him and be teased for the rest of eternity for it. He had Myrcella's favorite bottle of wine in one hand and his briefcase in the other, so JJ let them into the house before he could suggest he ring the bell. The house smelled amazing as always, and Grey Wind sprinted into the kitchen, probably to the water bowl Myrcella always left out for him. "Our puppy," they heard her greet him from the kitchen. "Elara," JJ called. "Peter," they heard Myrcella call back. "It's JJ," he yelled, giggling as he ran towards the kitchen too. "Oh, it's you, my love," she responded. Will smirked and shook his head, but he followed along, picking up a shouting Chatty on the way, who immediately descended into purrs, looking at him smugly over Will's shoulder as he nuzzled his cheek against his. He followed them into the kitchen, where Myrcella was dressing the salad as Will picked a carrot out of it. She looked beautiful, but more formal than she often would. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility for her to be in lingerie for their dinners, either in jeans and cream blouse, half of her golden hair fastened with a gold and pearl clip that he'd heard her tell Sansa had been her grandmother's. Hi, she smiled when she saw him, but there was a wariness, a forced cheer. It wasn't quite false but subdued. Hey Elle, he went over and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, squeezing her shoulder as he placed the wine down on the counter. He had left his briefcase in the hall. Joey and your grandfather joined the circus. My grandfather is on a call in the living room, and Joey is upstairs dressing, she noted. Dressing? He asked. She sighed and said in a lower voice, she gets a little stressed around him. He's been trying, but I think he reminds her of, you know. He hadn't even thought of what seeing Tywine would drudge up in Joey. She had only ever known Tywine in King's Landing, which he was sure she associated with her father, and it wasn't like Lannister family dinners were a jovial thing. Besides, Tywine was intimidating in his own right. Want me to go check on her? He asked. She paused for a moment and then offered a real smile. Promise you won't let her come down in the crown jewels. I'm not getting in the way of her and a tiara, he argued, and walked out of the kitchen to the sound of her laughter. He was a little nervous about leaving the boys to be introduced to Tywine on their own, but he knew they could handle themselves, and besides Myrcella would help them out. Besides, neither of them scared easy, not even from someone like Tywine. Which was both his fault and his triumph. He was only a little surprised to find Grey Wind at the top of the stairs when he walked up them. He must have slipped out after saying hello to Myrcella. Grey Wind got up and followed him to Joey's room, and he knocked on the door. Come in, Mommy, Joey called. It's Rob, he called back. There was silence for a moment, and then the door opened and there was Joey in a navy blue velvet dress, over white tights with navy blue polka dots. Her own golden hair was pulled back just like her mom's, though with a sparkly clip that he doubted was a family heirloom. Well, don't you look beautiful, he greeted her. She smiled, thank you, Rob. Then took his hand, come in. He walked into her bedroom and sat down on the extra bed. I was coming up to get you to come down. She nodded as though that made perfect sense and explained, I just don't know what shoes to wear. Well, you're not going outside. Do you need shoes? He asked. Yes, she answered simply and went back to her closet. All right then, I'm thinking snow boots, he told her. She giggled, Rob Herb. Fine, you're right, flip-flops, he teased. She ignored him this time, and disappeared into her closet and then came back out with a pair of patent leather shoes. Sitting down on the floor, she put them on, doing the Velcro straps, and then stood up and went to her mirror, turning one way and another. He got off the bed and walked behind her, crouching down. Wrapping his arms around her, she leaned back against him automatically. It had only been a few months since she would flinch from a hand to her shoulder. Are you dressing up for Grey Wind? He asked her gently. She leaned her temple against his cheek, her brow furrowing, and shook her head. How has it been having your great-grandfather here? He asked, remembering how Myrcella had told him she worked not to finish the conversation on her own, leaving it open for Joey to answer without being guided. Good, she said softly. But I get kind of nervous when he asks me questions. Want to hear a secret? He asked. She nodded. I get kind of nervous when he asks me questions too. I think it's his eyes. She half giggled, yeah. But you know what I know about him? He asked her. She nodded again. He loves you a lot. And I think he gets a little nervous talking to you too. Me? She asked with wide eyes, but I'm just a little girl. He chuckled, well, I don't think you're scary, but I can understand why some people do. She smiled, I'm not scary. Are you sure? He asked, let me hear your growl. She bared her teeth and girt at the mirror. It was impossible to comprehend how adorable she was. Pretty scary, he agreed. Now you, she said. He bared his teeth and gave it his best gurr. She let out a peal of laughter. Not scary at all. Not even a little? He asked. I bet Grey Wind thinks I'm scary. Grey Wind, come here. Grey Wind ambled over and he girt in his face, which Grey Wind responded to by licking him. Guess not. She giggled, maybe you're scary to other people, too. Don't try to make me feel better, he sighed dramatically, standing up. Without another word he took her hand and led her out into the hallway, not wanting to give her another chance to get nervous. "Did you have a good day at school?" he asked on their way down. "Yes, I got an extra art class," she told him. "Did you have a good day at work?" "You know, honey, I had my best day at work that I've had in a long time," he told her. "Oh, I love that," she responded, the way Marcella would. "Grey Wind, did you have a good day at work?" "His day was back-to-back meetings," he sighed. "Poor puppy," she lamented, "working like a dog." He laughed in surprise at her turn of phrase and she giggled, looking pretty proud of herself. That was how they entered the living room. Laughing and hands clasped. Grey Wind at their heels. Tywine was still on the phone, his tweed jacket now removed, one hand in his pocket as he paced around the room. Tywine turned when they walked in, and Joey squeezed his hand. He squeezed hers gently back. "I'll call you later," Tywine said into the phone and seemingly hung up without waiting for the other person's response. "Robb." "Mr. Lannister," he greeted him, then asked Joey, "What do you call him?" "Great-grandfather," she recited dutifully. "Kind of a mouthful," he reasoned, and Joey squeezed his hand in warning. "My great-granddaughter understands the importance of appropriately addressing people," Tywine noted. "Don't you, Joanna?" "Yes, sir," she agreed. Which was a step too far for his liking. "I think he needs a nickname," he proposed. "Now what rhymes with Tywine?" Tywine clenched his jaw. May be a different route." "Watch yourself, young man," Tywine warned. Had Grandpa Tully said that to him, he would have responded easily, "You first, old man." Now he merely smirked. "Joey was just telling me that she had a good day at school." "She had an extra archery class," he told him. "Art class," Joey corrected. "That's right, an extra astronomy class," he nodded. Joey giggled. "Art?" He looked at Tywine and raised his eyebrows. Tywine looked back at him and he gestured with his head to the full wall dedicated to Joey's art. After shooting him a death glare, Tywine gestured to the wall. "You must enjoy art." It was like a robot had been hired as a diplomat. "Yes, I do," Joey told Tywine as they walked around the couch. Tywine walked towards them as well and sat down, as though he at least understood how intimidating he was to her. She looked up at him and he squeezed her hand reassuringly before letting it go and sitting down on the couch too, lifting her up to sit in between them. She turned to Tywine and asked, "Do you like art too? Your house has so many pretty paintings." "I do like art," Tywine said, as though remembering how to have a conversation that had no other purpose except to learn about someone else. He must have caught the smile that Joey gave him because he said, "But many of those paintings were chosen by your great-grandmother." "Oh," Joey said, and then turned back to him and explained, "Her name was Joanna too. She was very beautiful and kind. And loved art," he said, rubbing her back, "so you two have a lot in common, it sounds like." Joey beamed at that and she turned back to Tywine. "Did she pick out the painting of the pond with the bridge? With all the flowers in the water?" Tywine nodded. I drew it." "You drew it?" Tywine asked, not even needing to be prompted. "Yes sir," Joey agreed readily, but this time the formality seemed sweet. "It's mine and Mommy's favorite painting." "Is that so?" Tywine asked her, his eyes flickering as though he was mentally updating his will. She nodded. "I drew it from memory, so it might not be very good. But, would you like to see it?" "Yes." Tywine slapped his knees. "I would." Joey got off the couch and he gave Tywine a thumbs up, who glared at him in return. She ran over to the wall and looked around and then stood up on her tiptoes to reach one of the small frames and lifted it off its hook. "It's going to be a nightmare to fill all those holes in," Tywine told him. He rolled his eyes but did so before Joey turned back. He smiled at her reassuringly and she walked over to Tywine and handed him the frame. Tywine held it in his hands as though he'd been presented with a sock puppet, but adjusted his glasses. And then he held the frame nearly tenderly. "You drew this?" Tywine asked, without looking at anything. Joey said, "I didn't have the right color markers, I don't think." Then pointed at something. "Isn't that Keith Rotindov supposed to be an aqua color?" Tywine squinted, leaning forward, like one might if they were appraising something at auction. "I think you're right. You needed pastels so you could blend here." "Pastels?" Joey whispered. Taiwan looked at her and he had a feeling a new set of pastels would arrive in the morning and said, "Nevertheless, young lady, this is quite an accomplishment." Joey beamed, "Thank you." Then with all the sweetness she'd shown when promising Ghost she'd never hurt him, asked, "Would you like to keep it?" "It's okay if you don't want to. I know that you have the original Taiwan supplied for her. But your great-grandmother tried to acquire as many studies of our originals as she could. Do you know what a study is?" Joey nodded her head. "It's a way of practicing, so that the artist can space things out and get the right perspective." He had no idea how this child knew the word perspective but not original. "Very good," Taiwan agreed. "But did you know that artists also made studies of other artists' works?" Joey shook her head. "Well, that's a rather silly thing not to know." Joey's eyes widened and his stomach clenched, but then Taiwan pulled a rabbit out of a hat, and said, "Since you've done so here." He wasn't sure that he had ever seen a more spectacularly surprised smile. As though they had known to leave them on a triumph, Mercila and his boys walked in the living room the next moment. "I'm sorry," Mercila said to all of them, "we didn't realize you had come down and you were off the phone, and well, we got a little distracted, didn't we?" The fact that JJ had a smudge of chocolate on his previously clean face suggested that the boys had offered themselves up as taste testers for whatever Mercila had made for dessert. "That's all right, we were talking art," he said, standing up when Taiwan did. "Boys, come say hello to Mr. Lannister." Will and JJ walked over, Mercila following at a gentle distance, her eyes on her grandfather all the while. He stepped back too, to make room for them in front of Taiwan, but Joey didn't. His boys closed ranks around her, one on either side, her just a half step behind. He wondered if it was conscious, the way she gripped onto the back of JJ's shirt, or slipped her arm through Will's, leaning her cheek against his arm, or if it was just automatic, the way it was for them to stand in between her and every man that wasn't him or John. Whether it was conscious or no, it was not unnoticed. Watching Taiwan take in the way their children reorganized themselves, readjusted that in his mind. He had been watching them do it for so long that it had almost faded into the background of the behaviors that he took notice of. With Taiwan here, Taiwan who was somehow the first person to whom he had openly admitted his feelings for Mercila, it reshaped itself, forcing its way into the forefront. It was the kids, in a way, who had given him permission to fall in love with her when everything else forbid it. And he realized then that he didn't need John's glares, or the promises he had made to him, to do things the right way with Mercila. All he needed was to think about their 3 children, and the way they somehow or other had decided that they belonged to each other, to want to do it so exactly right. Sometimes inevitability lent itself towards patience. This was a lot to think about while watching Will extend his hand, encumbered though he was by Joey's hold on his arm, and say, "Nice to meet you, sir, I'm Will Stark." Taiwan shook his hand. "Will. I have heard a lot about you." "And who is this?" "JJ Stark, Mr. Lannister." JJ, an ever-eager puppy, held out his hand next. He couldn't help but smile when JJ asked one of the most powerful men in the country, "Have you heard about me too?" Taiwan looked somewhat amused for a moment but then serious when he said, "Are you the one who got in a fight at school because of my great-granddaughter?" "That was me," JJ agreed. Taiwan nodded. "Did you get in trouble?" JJ gestured and said in Mercila's direction, "Just a little bit." To which Mercila intoned from behind them, "A little bit." Taiwan looked behind him like she was crazy, which was kind of fair enough. Her and JJ's bits were often complete nonsense to the rest of them, particularly because it was rare that they could even explain where they had come from. It meant something, though, that in front of a man who he was sure had never enjoyed any bit, a man who she desperately wanted something from, she didn't let JJ stand out there on his own. "Would you do it again?" Taiwan asked JJ. JJ nodded. "Oh yeah." Taiwan nodded once. "Very good." They all went to the table. Now that Mercila was in the room, he felt oddly on display. Though that was silly, because he was sure that Taiwan had been watching him just as closely with Joey. Everything with her was so natural, though, she allowed him not to really think about anything else. Now he felt like whatever he said, Taiwan would imagine was for his benefit. He wasn't sure where to put himself, which was fine because Mercila and Joey had made place cards. She had put him at one end of the table and Taiwan at the other. He had Joey on one side and JJ on the other. Ursula was in between JJ and Tywine, Will in between Joey and Tywine. It was a somewhat impossible seating chart, but she had chosen correctly. This looks great, Elle. He gestured to the feast in front of them. She smiled at him, and then offered the carving knife to Tywine. Would you mind carving, grandfather? While Tywine stood up to do so, wielding the knife as though he had slaughtered the animal too, he and Ursula got the kids' plates filled with sides. For a few minutes, it felt like a normal family dinner, the logistics of it clouding over all the uncertainty. The kids seemed to feel that way anyway, taking up the easy chatter that always quieted his own mind. Will, is this spicy? Joey gestured to something on her plate. Will didn't have any of it on his, so he took his fork and tried it off hers. A little, but you'll like it. Then stole another bite off her plate, and so do I. Joey giggled. We can share. Joey, guess what? Me and Kitty got through the labyrinth at recess today, JJ informed her. Joey's eyes went wide. No way. What did you find? Nothing, JJ offered with a "can you believe that" kind of tone. Joey's hand covered her mouth, and then she let out a giggle from behind it. That got Will going. He tried not to join in, but when Ursula snorted he was a goner. I'm sorry, grandfather, Ursula laughed. Then asked him, how do I describe this? He thought about it and Tywine turned his attention to him and he went with a bare bones description. 4 months JJ and my niece, Kitty, have been on a fantasy campaign, all to reach the treasure at the center of the labyrinth. Tywine took this in, which only made him want to laugh more, and then he turned to JJ, you were in a game in which any reward was possible and you chose nothing. Kitty did. JJ sighed, she said it was more realistic. Tywine nodded and then lifted a piece of meat to his mouth. I would have chosen gold. This led to Joey, JJ and Will talking about what they would have chosen. What would you choose, Elle? Will asked. Ursula's eyes were on Joey, and he didn't need to ask her what treasure she would have chosen. She had no idea she was already at the center of the labyrinth, that finally she and her daughter would be able to find their way out. He looked at Tywine, whose gaze met his. He may not understand choosing to find no reward, but he had chosen to conceal hers. And there it was again. He was chastened. There was a humility there. Here was a man who would take a multimillion-dollar painting off his wall and give it to his great-granddaughter, but hadn't known how to ask her if she enjoyed drawing. Here was a man who was giving his granddaughter her child and her freedom with one flick of his pen, and he didn't know how to tell her. I'd choose a puppy pile, he cut in, so that Ursula didn't have to make something up. A big one. Oh, that's good, JJ agreed. Would it be a pile of all the same kind of puppies or an assortment? Joey asked him. He grinned at Ursula. What a great follow-up question. She let out a laugh and he turned to Joey. I think we'd have to go assortment. A real bouquet. A bouquet, Will suggested. A bouquet. Joey let out a peal of surprised laughter. Tywine's silverware clanged on his plate and his chair screeched back on the floor as he stood up. Joey's laughter stopped at once, but Tywine didn't notice. Ursula, Rob, I need to speak with you in the kitchen, he announced. Will looked over at him and he stood up, and said, we'll be right back. Keep eating. Off your own plates. The kids barely cracked a smile, but his focus was on Ursula, who stood up noiselessly. Tywine stepped back from the table so that she could walk by him, and then they both followed after her. They and their kids, plus John or Sansa at least, had been in this kitchen, and it had never felt small, but standing there with Ursula and Tywine it did. He closed the door that hadn't been closed in years, separating them from the kids so that they couldn't overhear whatever it was that was said. Grandfather, I know that this isn't the type of conv, Ursula started, but Tywine held up a hand and she cut herself off immediately. A split second of fear went through him where he thought Tywine might out him then and there just because he could, but that would have taken little thought on his part, and Tywine seemed to be ruminating on how to say what he wanted to, what he had ordered them back here to. His raised hand fell to the counter. She glanced at him nervously and he tried to look at her reassuringly. Tywine's eyes caught on the exchange, and he started twisting his wedding ring the way he had earlier that day. Rob and I have discussed what you asked me, Tywine finally said. Ursula's brow knit for a moment, and he knew she was upset that he hadn't told her. He had thought about it, of course, but this wasn't his thing to tell as much as he wanted to put her out of her misery. I told him that I would not authorize you to give your shares away, that I wanted you to sell them, Tywine told her, and that if Gendry would not purchase them then and only then would I let you give them away. But, he cut in. But Tywine repeated with a stony gaze and then said to Myrcella, if you want to give them to him now I understand and will compensate you for them in full. Myrcella was silent for a moment. I don't understand. Those shares are a part of your inheritance, Tywine told her, and you should be appropriately compensated for. I don't care about the money, she interrupted him. Myrcella, never let me hear you say such a thing again, he chided her. She let out a laugh, but it turned into a cry halfway through, and then she did what she probably hadn't done since she was Joey's age, and walked right up to him and hugged him. You're going to help me, she said with her cheek to his chest. Tywine didn't seem to know what to do for a moment, but slowly his arms wrapped around her. Yes, he agreed. She let out a little cry of relief and he felt tears fill his eyes as she hugged Tywine tighter, her eyes closing. In the gentlest voice he had ever heard from him, Tywine said as he at first awkwardly, and then tenderly, rubbed her back, there, my dear. It's all going to be all right. If he doesn't take the deal, we're going to kill him. Aren't we, Robb? Yes sir, he agreed. She laughed, you have no idea what this means to me. Thank you. Don't worry, we'd enjoy it, Tywine told her. He chuckled and her eyes opened, and she mouthed thank you. He nodded at her, though he hadn't done anything at all, and someday he would tell her that even if Tywine wouldn't. Myrcella released Tywine, and moved away, but her grandfather wasn't quite ready to let her go, and his hand caught on her cheek, which he swiped of tears. What made you change your mind? Myrcella asked. About selling them. Joanna, Tywine told her simply. Neither of them needed further explanation than that. She was the reason for all of it. Tywine told her though, she's very like her namesake. Even has the same taste in art. Myrcella giggled, you can't give a 6-year-old a Monet. Of course not, Tywine agreed, but she'll be 7 soon enough. Myrcella rolled her eyes, she wants a tea set. A tea set, Tywine repeated. Myrcella nodded and wiped her eyes more fully, and teased, and then you'll have to have a tea party with her. Tywine's jaw set, afternoon tea is a dignified affair, Myrcella, you know this. Not when there are boars involved, Myrcella argued, looping her arm through his and taking him back towards the table. I don't know what a boar is, but I am certain it has no place at afternoon tea, Tywine informed her. He followed them back to the table, where the kids had made good progress on their plates. They retook their seats and ate as well, or he and Tywine did. Myrcella didn't touch her food, but for once he didn't worry about that. When Joey asked Tywine to read with her before bed, he knew that if she had asked him for that Monet, or to wear a boar, or to stand on his head, he would have done so. More importantly, so did Myrcella. Chapter 21. Summary. I hope you're all still enjoying this. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. I think we should go check, Will said. This was the 3rd time this had been suggested by one of his sons. It had started that morning when they had all seen one another in the driveway before school. He and Myrcella had been talking about the storm that was set to arrive that afternoon, and he had made the mistake of mentioning to her that she and Joey were more than welcome to come stay with them. She had thanked him but demurred, citing the fact that he had told her when he was convincing her to take the guest house that it was operated by the same generator as the main house, so they would be perfectly fine. He had rolled his eyes a bit at that, but stupidly had not taken notice of his boys listening into their conversation. By noon, the kids had to be picked up from school. The roads were meant to be undrivable by mid-afternoon, so he had told his nanny to stay put and went to get the boys himself. He passed 3 accidents on his way there, the inhabitants of Wintertown acting as though they had never seen snow before. For about an hour or so when they got back, it was light enough that the boys could play outside with Grey Wind in the snow while he took some meetings from his home office. By 3 o'clock it was whiteout conditions, and his calls were breaking up, people cancelling meetings so that they could hunker down. One person even told him that they had to get to the grocery store and he had narrowly resisted telling them they would have to live there for the next couple of days. He had gone to check on the boys and found them both in the living room, on the couch with Grey Wind, their cheeks somehow still pink from the cold, looking uniquely healthy and well in every way possible. All was not, though. He knew when Will had turned to him with a furrowed brow and said, "I think you should have made them come stay." It was pretty laughable. The guest house was well insulated, had a fireplace of its own, and was, as previously noted, hooked up to the main generator. Ursula was not the type to leave grocery shopping to the last moment in a blizzard, and he knew that she and Joey would be well prepared. They had probably used the storm as an excuse to make hot chocolate and put on fuzzy socks and go through a stack of books underneath a throw blanket. The trouble was, that image of them made him want to go check on them all the more. He had used the boy's concern as an excuse to reach out to her. Not that he needed one, not really, but things between them had been strange lately. Their interactions felt weighted, charged, and he had scabs on his palms from digging his nails into them, stopping himself from reaching for her and kissing her. So he had texted before dinner saying JJ and Will require proof of life. 3 minutes later she had sent him a picture of Joey, standing on a step stool wearing an apron and holding a whisk with a huge smile on her face with an accompanying text: "Captain's log, day 1, the crew has demanded breakfast for dinner. There is a possibility we have all grown delirious, as it was requested they be in the shape of our beloved galley cat, and I have complied. We intend to eat the ears first." About 15 minutes after that, he got a picture of a cat face-shaped pancake, missing one ear, and then a follow-up of Chatty glaring directly into camera with a text that read, "He shall avenge his brethren." So, it was safe to say that they were fine. "You think Chatty took his revenge?" he asked him. Will smirked. He and JJ had demanded to see the pictures multiple times, remarking on how good the pancake shape was, but said, "They are Southern girls. They might just die." He laughed, "Just like that. Lose the will to live because their snowsuits got wet." "That's not funny," JJ argued. He and Will met eyes and both managed not to laugh, and he said, "You're right. I'll call her after dinner, okay? But Ella is going to make fun of me." At that, both of the boys starting doing impressions of Ursula's impression of him. For some reason it involved a lot of throat clearing, to the point that anytime someone actually cleared their throat they all would burst out laughing. They finished up dinner and the boys went to watch a movie. He went back to his office to see if anything had come in the last couple of hours, and as he was walking there his phone started to ring. It was Castle. "You stuck in a snowbank," he answered. "Check your email," Castle ordered. He hurried to his computer, waiting for it to reboot. He put Castle on speakerphone as he typed in his credentials, and then went straight into his email. There was one from SLYNT from 10 minutes ago. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. It had been a week since he had sent their offer. Since then, he had been trying not to think about it. Which meant that he had been thinking about it all the time. For someone who was usually long-winded and needlessly formal, SLYNT's email was remarkably simple. "See the attached offer, acceptance and signed dissolution of marriage." It then went into painstaking detail about how to send the fully executed paperwork to him, but he didn't care. He opened the attachments, not trusting SLYNT for a moment, and scrolled through, making sure there were no changes written in, and then to the bottom. Gadri Faring had signed his wife and child away without amendment on 3 separate lines. He looked at the signatures, trying to get a sense of the pressure he had placed on the pen, whether he was angry or whether it was the 30th document he had signed that day. They knew from Tywine that he had been angry. Not trusting the police, Tywine had his own security keeping an eye on Gadri, and they had stopped him on 3 separate occasions from coming north. The last had been about a month ago, and since then there had been nothing. Apparently Gadri had a new girlfriend. He would pray for her, and for himself, for being grateful that she had distracted Gadri from the woman and little girl that he loved so dearly. Rob Castle said. "I'm here," he answered. He cleared his throat and then smiled, tears in his eyes as he thought of Ursula impersonating him. The fact that she did that. That she knew that he would laugh. "I've got to call you back, but thank you. For everything. Tell her I'm thrilled for her, will you?" Castle asked. He smirked, remembering that Castle had come on to bring objectivity to this whole thing, and said, "I will." As they hung up, he pressed print, and grabbed an empty folder from the bottom drawer of his desk. He sat there, listening to his slow at-home printer chugging out Ursula and Joey's freedom page by page. Joey didn't know it, wouldn't know it. As far as she was concerned, her and her mother had once lived with a bad man, and they didn't anymore. Instead, they now lived in a home with an entire room dedicated to her drawings, and a chest full of every color bore imaginable. They had a cat who spoke more in a single day than she ever had in King's Landing, and about 1,000 yards away lived 2 boys who would play more gently if it meant she'd join them, and read her bedtime stories, and make sure no one ever hurt her again. Exactly as it should be. But Myrcella would. Last night was the last night she would ever have to lie in bed and wonder what would become of her and her daughter. Tonight she would sleep with the knowledge that every court in the country would protect her and her daughter's rights to be rid of him. "Dad, can we make popcorn?" Will's voice broke him out of his thoughts. His brow furrowed. "Is everything okay?" He realized then that the tears had fallen and he wiped his cheeks. "Yeah baby, I'm good. Really good." "What's up?" Will still looked confused but he gestured behind him. "JJ and I wanted to make popcorn. I know how." He nodded. "Yeah, that's fine. I think I'm going to need you to watch him for a little bit, is that okay?" "It's crazy out there," Will told him. "I'm not driving," he promised. "I need to go over to Myrcella's for a little while." Will looked at his face and asked, "Did something happen with her divorce?" He thought about Will asking so soon after they had come to town, if Gardry was the villain in their lives. And the way Will's voice always lowered when he asked about him, like he had to be bigger, stronger, older to deal with it. The way he didn't even find it funny when his beloved Uncle Rukan jokingly hit on Myrcella, like someone should have to get a special permit to even look at her. And he couldn't keep the smile off his face, getting to tell him, "Yeah, it's settled. It's over." Will startled somewhat and he opened his mouth and then closed it and then asked again, his voice vulnerable and high now, "It's over?" He nodded. "Good job." He chuckled, "Thanks. Though I don't know that it was me that really did it in the end." Will nodded. "Yeah, that's sort of the thing nowadays. The princess saving herself and all that." He smirked. "Well, if Kitty has anything to say about it." Will jokingly started clearing his throat and he rolled his eyes. "Want to bring this over for her to sign tonight? Are you okay to watch JJ for a little bit? If so, I'll text her and ask." "Can't we come?" Will wondered. "Not tonight," he determined. "Geez, just not tonight. I'll tell her you're thinking about her though, okay?" Will nodded, so he picked up his phone and texted Myrcella to ask if he could drop by. She sent him a gif of a female celebrity spying from behind a tree, which he was pretty sure meant she was calling him a stalker, but let him know that he could come over at 7:45. He knew that this was pointed. That she was telling him in no uncertain terms that he was not allowed to come over and wind Joey up right before she was meant to be going to bed. He helped the boys make popcorn and mediated an argument about a movie apparently while Will was out of the room. JJ had selected one that had not been mutually agreed upon and ate a handful and sat with them for the first few minutes while he watched the clock. They didn't have school so he wasn't too worried about JJ going to bed on time, and at 7:41 he got up and put on his boots and waterproof winter coat and hat and mittens, which he knew would be totally useless against the snow. He tucked the folder into his coat and zipped it up high and headed out. It was brutal out there, but if he told the story later, he would say that he hadn't noticed. He knocked on the door and Myrcella appeared a moment later, her mouth popping open when she took sight of him and ran to open the door. "What's the abominable snowman doing on my doorstep at this time of night?" she asked. "Freezing my ass off," he grinned. She stepped aside and he kicked his boots of snow and came inside, dragging a trail of water anyway. He pulled off his hat and mittens and she took them from him and slid down the hall. He took off his boots and unzipped his coat, hanging it on the hook furthest away from her and Joey's, and then followed her into the kitchen. She was turning on the oven to the lowest heat and stuck his hat and mittens in there. "They're going to catch on fire," he informed her. "Well, I'll buy you new ones," she told him. "They'll be pink but not singed." He chuckled and she picked up a wine glass. "Can I pour you a glass?" he asked. "Wine?" She smiled. "Or I can put cranberry juice in a wine glass for you like I do for Joey." He cleared his throat and her eyes lit, but he shook his head. No, I was just wondering if you had any champagne." "Fancy pants," she grinned and went over to the cabinet and grabbed him a wine glass. She stopped midway there and turned to look at him, and then her eyes fell to the folder that had somehow stayed warm and dry and binding on the walkover. Her voice lifted along with her eyebrows. Champagne. He nodded and she laughed, tears spilling out of her eyes. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, and he set the papers down on the counter. It was just in time for her to look up and launch herself at him. He caught her with one arm, but it didn't matter, because hers were tight around his neck. His other arm wrapped around her, her body shaking in a mixture of laughter and tears. Her emotions almost seemed too strong for her body, but they weren't, not nearly. It had withstood much more. Happiness and relief would not be the things that broke her. "Thank you," she cried into his neck. He mumbled something unintelligible even to him into hers. She kissed the base of his cheek as he kissed hers, and then she kissed the apple of it, and then for an exhilarating moment she kissed his lips. Hers were salty and soft, and he wanted to kiss them over and over again. It was a kiss of exultation though, a peck, nothing more, and then she was hugging him again and he was squeezing her back.